Connecticut over-reported by a couple 100,000, by basically 1 million. And they said it was a clerical error. And this time it was the state of Massachusetts and the new pandemic unemployment insurance that it makes it available to people who were gig workers, Uber drivers and people like that. And they said that there were over 2 million who were collecting that, and was also about 1 million too high. So the Labor Department has had some trouble getting accurate figures, but maybe we'll be a little sympathetic, give the people at those states a little bit of a break because they're kind of overwhelmed these days.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much for being with us. That is our Chief Economics and Policy Correspondent, Michael McKee. Coming up here, we're going to talk with Tony Blinken. He's the Senior Foreign Policy Advisor to the Biden campaign. Talk to him about all these developments with China, the growing hostility between the United States and China, what it all means. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. To stay alert, you must remain at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit your contact with other people. If you have to go out, keep your distance from others, 2 meters apart where possible. Continue to wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks extend losses as rising trade tensions between the USA and China adds to concern about a pace of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Crude oil erased its earlier gains. The S&P declined about 1% after swinging between gains and losses, led by declines in the healthcare and information technology sectors. A report indicated another 2.44 million Americans claimed jobless benefits. We check the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500's down 0.5%, down 14. The Dow's down 0.1%, down 34. And the Nasdaq's off 0.5%, down 45. The 10-year is up for 30 seconds. The yield is 0.66%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up over 1% at $33.83 a barrel, with COMEX gold down 1.6% at $17.2380 an ounce. The dollar-yen stands at 107.72. The euro's $1.0952, and the British pound $1.2223. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Now more Bloomberg Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It is time now for First Word News, and for that we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. A grim milestone in the coronavirus pandemic. The number of infections worldwide has doubled over the past month and has now topped 5 million. The United States accounts for almost a third of the cases. Health experts widely believe the actual count is higher than the official numbers, as COVID-19 has proved difficult to detect and track. The official death toll is at more than 328,000. U.S. fatalities have topped 93,000. President Trump is set to visit the Ford Motor Company's ventilator facility in Detroit today. The big question is whether the president will wear a mask. The automaker has required that everyone at its facilities wear a mask at all times, but Mr. Trump has been non-committal on the question. His visit comes a day after he threatened to withhold funds over Michigan's mail-in ballot effort. China is expected to tighten its grip on Hong Kong with a new security law. It would curb separation, sedition, foreign interference, and terrorism in the former British colony. That's according to the Hong Kong news media. The move could trigger more street protests. President Trump is pulling the United States out of the Open Skies Treaty. It's a pact designed to promote transparency between the United States and Russia. The president says Russia has violated the agreement. U.S. officials claim Russia has blocked the U.S. from conducting surveillance flights, which are permitted under the 18-year-old treaty. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Over a distinguished foreign policy career, Tony Blinken has served as Deputy Secretary of State, as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, as National Security Advisor to Vice President Biden, and is now Senior Foreign Policy Advisor to the Biden for President campaign. Tony, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us. We really have to talk about China today, given the rhetoric, the exchange of rhetoric that's going on between President Trump and the authorities over in China. President Trump saying they were careless and that really led to what he called mass worldwide deaths. And China coming back and saying, we like you being president because it unites our country against you. Is this a different level of hostile rhetoric, or is this just more of the same?
In a sense, it's both, David, and it's great to be with you, first of all. We've seen China become a factor in our campaigns and our elections for some time. If you go back to 1992, then Governor Clinton made China an issue in the campaign, criticizing the incumbent Bush administration for toasting the so-called butchers of Beijing in the wake of Tiananmen Square. So on one level, it's not new, but I think the level of rhetoric is probably hotter than it's been, and of course there's a good reason for that, which is that China happens to be in the middle of a crisis that's afflicting not just the United States but the entire world, and that is the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis. The virus originated in China, and China as a great nation has great responsibilities, and those responsibilities are even greater in the context of a virus that originated in China.
Tony, how do you assess President Xi's position and China's position right now, given this? On the one hand, they have some challenges on their economy, without a doubt. On the other hand, they seem to be ahead of a lot of the rest of the world and catching up with it. And they're asserting their authority, their power around the world. Are they stronger or weaker than they were a year ago?
Well, I think they're in some ways stronger, but that's in a sense less a function of the virus and their response to the virus, and more of a function, unfortunately, from my perspective, of the United States policy over the last few years. If you think about it, David, the approach that President Trump has taken is helping China achieve four big strategic objectives. First, weakening our alliances. China sees our voluntary alliances as a source of strength for us and weakness for them. Unfortunately, President Trump has taken a sledgehammer to our alliances, and they are in much worse shape than they were when he came to office. Second, our administration has left a leadership vacuum around the world that China is only too happy to fill. We see that now even in the World Health Organization, which for all its problems and need for reform, is nonetheless an important organization. We've abandoned it. China's filling the vacuum, and you can see that across the board. That's a way for China to expand its influence and the United States to lose influence. Third, this administration has given Beijing free rein when it comes to human rights, with the Uyghurs, for example, 1 million people in what amount to concentration camps, as well as cracking down on democracy in Hong Kong, and rationing up tensions with Taiwan, with nary a word from President Trump. And finally, when it comes to investing in our own future and underinvesting in our own democracy, we've seen this administration underinvest in our future and the competitiveness of our workers, and maybe just as important, reduce the appeal of the United States and our democracy in the eyes of the world, all of which the government in Beijing takes advantage of. So it's a long way of saying that I think China is in a stronger position geostrategically than it's been, and that's in part the result of the actions that this administration has taken.
One can, and many do, question the way President Trump went about what he did, but a lot of people agree more or less, including our allies, with his objectives. That is to say, President Trump saying we need to get tougher on China when it comes to trade and technology transfers, things like that. Does President Trump deserve any credit for at least taking on that issue?
I think that there is a consensus that the lack of reciprocity in the commercial relationship with China was unsustainable, and that something needed to be done about it. So to that extent, yes, but the way he's gone about it has been both counterproductive and ineffectual in a couple of ways. First, the tariff war that the president initiated as his response has done tremendous damage here in the United States to our farmers, to our manufacturers, to our consumers. And the gain from that was a hollow agreement with China for it to buy more American things, which of course it's not doing, in part because of the COVID crisis, but it couldn't reach the numbers that were set even without the crisis. So what we've seen is tremendous damage done through a tariff war and nothing to show for it. On top of that, the way I think the president's gone about it in terms of alienating our allies and not making common cause with countries that are similarly aggrieved by some of the practices that China has, that's been a huge mistake and has undercut our ability to get real, meaningful change in China on the structural issues that we are rightfully concerned about. We're about 25% of the world's GDP, the United States alone. When we're working with our allies and partners in Europe and in Asia, we're 50 or 60% of the world's GDP. That's a lot harder for China to ignore. But President Trump has alienated virtually all of our allies and partners in Europe and in Asia. And so instead of making common cause of our common concerns with China's actions, we've gone it alone, and the results or lack of results are there to show for it.
Tony, how do you assess, and for that matter, how does Vice President Biden assess the vital national interest of the United States in dealing with China? What are the critical issues we need to advance, and what policy would get us to really advance those interests?
So there's no doubt that of all the relationships in the world, the one between the United States and China is the most significant and the one that is going to have the biggest repercussions for our future and indeed for the future of people across the planet over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so we have to do what we can to get this relationship right. From the Vice President's perspective, China poses a real challenge. It's a serious competitor. He knows, Vice President knows China, knows its leaders, and is clear-eyed about the challenge. But when we think about it, we believe that American workers and businesses can outcompete anyone, hands down, if their government is fighting like heck for them and giving them the tools to succeed and to compete. So, the first focus I think we need to bring to the competition with China is making sure that we're investing at home in our workers through infrastructure and education and innovation. Second, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be working with democratic allies and partners to take on the actions of the Chinese government that we find objectionable, including some of its aggressive and predatory behavior, instead of alienating them. Third, we need to be standing up, not sitting down and ignoring democracy, human rights, and human dignity, including in Hong Kong, including in Xinjiang, instead of giving China a pass on its actions. But at the same time, if we do that, if we are engaging China from a position of unity with our partners and strength at home, then I think we have a much greater ability to work with China where it's clearly in our interest to do so. Issues like climate change, nuclear nonproliferation, and indeed global health, all of these things would benefit tremendously from cooperation with China. We've seen it in the past. We saw it in dealing with the Ebola crisis. We saw it with the Paris Climate Accord. So there's a potentially positive agenda there because it happens to be in our interest, in China's interest, and in the interest of the world. But we're much more likely to be able to do that if we're acting from a position of relative strength than of relative weakness, which is what we're doing now because of the policies of this administration.
Tony, finally, give us a sense of how you think this might play. November's a long way away, but in this presidential election, how big an issue will this be? I mean, historically, I think presidents we've elected based on domestic issues. Will China play largely in the race toward November?
Well, David, it's kind of funny because I think the President Trump's campaign is trying to make China an issue, but it's a classic case of projection where the president takes what is an inherent weakness and fault of his own and tries to project it onto one of his adversaries. And in this case, I think it will be a part of the election, in large part because the virus is so dominant. And the story is a profoundly bad one for President Trump. First, previous administrations, especially the Obama-Biden administration, knew that a pandemic was a likely problem. We'd faced, of course, SARS. We knew that this was a looming challenge and threat, including one originating in China. And we put in place defenses to help prevent, predict, and mitigate any pandemic that arose. We had a strong presence of CDC folks in China. We had a dedicated office at the National Security Council of the White House to deal with pandemics. We had a program literally called Predict that helped us detect the outbreak of pandemics. All of this, the Trump administration either eliminated or gutted. So our defenses were taken down. And then when the virus emerged in January, and when it was critical for China to provide information and to give access to international experts, it didn't do that. The government didn't do it. And that was the moment when President Trump should have been insisting that China live up to its responsibilities. And not only did he not do that, he went out of his way to praise the government in Beijing and President Xi for their cooperation and transparency at the very time that the government was doing just the opposite. I think he was doing that because he desperately wanted to get his trade deal concluded, which it was concluded on January 15th, and to make sure that nothing interrupted its implementation. And he also didn't want, he was trying to play down the dangers of the virus. But the end result was, at the very moment it was important to be strong with China and insisting that it meet its responsibilities, President Trump folded. And the response or lack of response here has put us in a terrible place. So, you know, it's ironic, too, because at the very moment that President Trump was doing that, Joe Biden was doing just the opposite in January. He was pointing out the grave dangers of the pandemic, and he was calling on President Trump not to take the word of the government in Beijing for what was going on in China and the need to get our own experts there and get to the bottom of what was happening. So, you know, I suspect it will be part of the election, and it's a powerful contrast, and a powerful contrast in favor of Joe Biden.
Okay, Tony, I really appreciate your being with us. That's Tony Blinken. He's the senior foreign policy advisor to Biden for President campaign. And later on, we're going to be talking with Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Asset managers who
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Switch on Acorn TV, the brand new streaming service featuring world-class TV from Britain and beyond. Watch exclusive premieres like the colourful crime drama Queens of Mystery.
Once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
And fan favourites like Inspector George Gently.
I'm just an old copper doing his job.
If you love drama with a little mystery thrown in, enjoy 30 days free with code ACORN30. Then just $4.99 a month. No adverts, no contract, cancel anytime. Join online today at acorn.tv.
For more than 20 years, Asda supported our communities. We've raised over £23 million for Fair Share and the Trussell Trust. And recently, we've donated supplies to frontline NHS workers and carers. We've always been proud to serve those around us. Visit asda.com/creating change for better. Asda, we're all in this together.
We're all having to get used to the new normal. And at Birkbeck University, we're experts at being adaptable. As London's evening university, we've been flexing around the lives of busy commuters for nearly 200 years. And you can find everything you need to secure your place for autumn online. From expert advice to virtual tours, a live chat with our students and course applications. Make the new normal, studying for the career that you really want. Search Birkbeck, and it's new problem solved.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We have coming up yet this hour, and we're going to talk with Ewan Relly. He is an international investor with BDA Partners. We're going to talk to him about the relative safety or risk around the world given this pandemic crisis. And then we'll get to spend some time with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and talk to her about her new proposal, the HEROES Act, of another $3 trillion. Also ask her about all that legislation being proposed dealing with China. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are slightly lower on trade tensions between the U.S. and China. On the economic front, the number of weekly jobless claims is once again in the millions. Nearly 2.5 million people filed for benefits last week, bringing the total to 38.6 million since the coronavirus pandemic began. However, if there's any consolation in the numbers, the majority of states are showing a decline in continuing jobless claims. Another brick-and-mortar retailer is closing up shop permanently. Victoria's Secret says all of its 251 locations will close by the end of the year. And Hertz is on the brink of bankruptcy. The car rental company is saddled with almost $21 billion in debt. On Wall Street, the Dow is down 46 points, NASDAQ dropping 54, S&P down 15. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
You know your body, and you know when something's off, when something doesn't feel quite right. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, rashes, and fever. They could be signs of lupus. Listen to your body. Take care of yourself. We're here to help you take control of your health. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
In these times of loss and crisis, the people you trust to ask the questions you need answered become even more vital.
Should the president, though, impose the Defense Production Act?
Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
Help us understand what we know so far.
Bloomberg Business Week.
They are on the front line of the impact of the coronavirus.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, the entire world has been rocked by the pandemic, which is not necessarily good news for investors almost anywhere. We turn now to a global investor, really, Ewan Relly. He is Senior Managing Director at BDA Partners. Ewan, always great to talk with you. We had some PMI numbers out of the United States this morning, well in contraction, down to the 34 range, maybe a little better than expected. How do you look at the U.S. as an investment opportunity right now, given the pandemic?
We are generally somewhat bullish on the U.S., David. By the way, thanks for having me back. We're bullish on the U.S., relatively speaking, because there is great desire by the business community and by politicians, I think, increasingly of both parties, to get manufacturing open and get the economy rolling again.
Fascinating. Are you seeing any indications of a recovery yet, or are we just waiting for the second half and much less to 2021?
David, I think the best analogy I can tell you is the economy is still rolling down a hill. The good news is it's rolling a little slower downwards than it was previously, And as I say, I think market participants are scrambling to try to find ways to revive business activity in all its forms.
And compare and contrast, if you can, with Europe, because we also had PMI numbers out of Europe that actually surprised a little bit at the upside today, didn't they?
Yes, they did. I think, the world is jittery at the moment, David, and we're seeing quite wide swings on any good news or bad news. I think there are some structural challenges in Europe. Germany, as usual, seems to be holding up reasonably well. I think we have a big challenge as the UK tries to exit the EU fully by year end, with very little prospect of a deal. So there's some downside potential there, which worries me. I think, again, the U.S. is generally a little stronger and better placed to bounce back. I think, there's a lot that could go wrong in continental Europe.
At the same time, one of the issues for investors is not just where it's going to go, because it's going to go up or down, but what the valuation is now. Is Europe relatively cheap?
I think the world is obviously much cheaper than it was. It's frankly hard to tell today whether Europe is cheaper than the U.S. I think there's more risk in Europe, but potentially that means more upside for investors too.
Tell us about China. U.S.-China relations are not looking good right at the moment. We have this ongoing exchange back and forth by Twitter, largely, between the President of the United States and various officials over in China. Seems to be a lot of hostility. What does that mean for investments in Asia?
I think clearly China's neighbors are trying to find ways to benefit and are beginning to benefit. I think, we like Vietnam, we like Korea, we like Taiwan, all of which will benefit from supply chains moving away from China. Frankly, this is driven largely by politics. We now have a situation for the first time I can remember where politicians from both parties in the U.S. are strongly anti-China. There's just a chorus of anti-China publicity, and to some extent we're hearing echoes of that in Europe too. But the Chinese can't get a break from anywhere at the moment, and even when they've tried to take positive action, such as committing a couple of $1 billion to the WHO, that's being relatively poorly received by market participants and certainly by politicians globally.
Ewan, I don't know what your experience tells you, but I don't remember a time when so much of an investment decision is really bound up with what government's going to do, whether it's on the monetary side or the fiscal side. Certainly true in the United States, certainly true in Europe, certainly true in China. How does an investor incorporate that? Are you investing on the fundamentals, or are you investing on what you think the governments are going to do?
I think what we're told as investors is always to try to look beyond the short-term swings, to look at the fundamentals. I think even the Chinese economy actually still does have some considerable underlying momentum, and the great economies of the world will recover from this. The question is really who is best placed to emerge from what looks like a pretty dire recession globally now. Who's best placed to emerge quickest? And I have some confidence that the U.S. is relatively well placed, but there's going to be a roller coaster ride, I think, over the next few months everywhere.
Okay, Ewan, I really appreciate you being back with us. That is Ewan Relly. He is Senior Managing Director at BDA Partners. And now it's time for Bloomberg First Word News. And for that, we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Democratic congressional leaders are urging President Trump to fly flags at half-staff on public buildings across the United States when the U.S. coronavirus death toll reaches 100,000. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say the gesture would, quote, serve as a national expression of grief so needed by everyone in our country, end quote. There have been more than 93,000 coronavirus deaths in the United States. Japan could lift the state of emergency in Tokyo and surrounding regions as soon as Monday. A government panel of health experts told Prime Minister Shinzo Abe it is safe to do so as long as current trends continue. Japan has seen a steady fall in its new confirmed infections over the past few weeks, and its overall numbers for COVID-19 cases and deaths are the lowest among the group of 7 leading democracies. Actress Lori Loughlin could be headed to prison. Court records show she and her husband, designer Massimo Giannulli, have agreed to plead guilty in the college admissions scandal. Loughlin has agreed to serve 2 months behind bars, although the final decision is up to the judge. The couple's accused of paying $500,000 in bribes to get their daughters into the University of Southern California as recruits for the crew team. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. Coming up here, we're going to have an exclusive interview with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. This is Bloomberg.
What began in China?
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these
City.
and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
While he was gone, Al had some kind of vote to make him the managing. You remember, he used to come up all the time in the Raiders game that he was the managing general partner. By the way, don't forget, there was a lot going on in Munich. But you know how tired that man was to come back and find out that Al Davis had strong-armed his team from him while he was gone?
Search The Right Time with Bomani Jones to listen.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites?
TuneIn makes it easy.
Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest editions.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
on the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
It, I should say, at no profit, and the cost will be very low, just a few dollars. So it is easily affordable by mid to high-income countries, so there's no issue there. For the low-income countries, we're working with global organizations like CEPI, Gavi, that are supported by the Gates Foundation in many countries. And we will find ways to bring this vaccine to the people around the world, even those countries that have very low income. But the value of it is that the cost is going to be very low. And therefore, cost is absolutely not an issue for mid to high-income countries. The issue is a manufacturing capacity. And that's what our team is working on 24/7. They've done a beautiful job over the last 10 days, and they'll continue working very hard on that. We have secured the $1
Pascal,
billion
you said it yourself.
capacity, by the way.
This won't be about cost. This will be about production capacity. And my question to you is a pretty simple one. If you've been backed quite heavily by a couple of developed countries, are you assuring to us that they won't be getting the vaccine over everybody else? My question to you is basically not how much will this cost. How do you fairly disseminate the volume of the vaccine to distribute it evenly, globally, without a preference on a single country over others?
Well, Jonathan, there is no preference for any country. And as I said, we have geographic-based supply chains, so we can serve everybody. The only issue is we cannot make a vaccine if people don't want it. So essentially, we're in discussions today with countries, governments, and global organizations. So they look at our vaccine, they make a choice, and they tell us whether they want it or not. There are alternative technologies, as you know. There's modified RNA-based vaccine. There's a couple of those, 2 or 3. And there are other technologies as well. So essentially, it's not for us to limit the distribution. It's basically for governments and global institutions to tell us whether they want it or not. And if they want it, we will supply it. The cost is very low, so it's not going to be a limitation at all.
That was the CEO of AstraZeneca speaking earlier with Bloomberg Television about their development of vaccine. Coming up, we're going to be speaking with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. A lot of developments today about possible positive steps forward on further support for the economy. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
With a medical crisis, can any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Ferro.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Right now,
Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We're going to hear in a few moments from the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who last week had a proposal called the HEROES Act, which would appropriate $3 trillion in further support for the U.S. economy. And goodness knows it could use it, given the economic data that were coming in, including today, have been coming in. In the meantime, earlier today, there's been further news with Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin saying that he does agree there needs to be further help, but maybe not right away. We can wait a bit. And President Trump himself, speaking at the White House, said that he had been talking with the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, about some sort of positive steps they could agree to as part of a package. Perhaps, we don't know, as a response to this HEROES Act that has been proposed by the House Democrats. As I say, the one thing that is clear is the economy could use the help, as we have so many unemployed now. Another 2.4 million came in unemployed just today from last week. And now we are joined, I'm pleased to say, by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. So, Madam Speaker, thank you so much for being here. I was just saying the issue really is the economy and getting people back to work and supporting all of these workers who are out of work. How can we not only get them back to work, but have them feel comfortable and safe in coming back to work?
Thank you, David. Yes, indeed, we want the economy to open up, and the science is the path to that. Testing, tracing, treating, isolating. It has to be a scientific answer. And, of course, we hope and pray for a vaccine and some therapies. But in the meantime, we have testing, and that's what we need to use to get a handle on the size of the challenge we have to trace it and to treat so that we have fewer deaths. That is the answer. Now, in addition to that, and we have that a strategic plan in our HEROES Act, a strategic plan to do that with, as you do in business, have a goal, have a timetable, have milestones, have benchmarks. That's exactly what we have. In addition to that, in order to support the economy, we honor our heroes by keeping state, local, territorial, and tribal governments functioning. These people, many of them on the front line of risking their lives to save other people's lives, now fear losing their jobs. All of these services that are rendered are not only jobs, but they meet the needs of the American people. That helps the economy. And then third, putting money into the pockets of the American people. We all know that issues like unemployment insurance, food stamps, and the rest really provide stimulus to the economy, and we have to do that. So we think in our package, the HEROES Act, that we do just exactly that. A scientific path to open the economy safely and soon. Supporting our heroes to keep those jobs in place, which are important to the economy, and again, the stimulus that money in the pockets of the American people provides.
Of course, the question on everyone's mind is the prospects of passage of the HEROES Act or something like it, and when it might happen. We've heard today from Secretary Mnuchin that he talked to you at least last week about something. He agrees something needs to be done. Not sure how quickly. President Trump today said he's working with Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, on some sort of package. Are you in active negotiations? How much hope do you have that we'll have something relatively soon?
Well, I'm optimistic because the American people fully support what we are doing. 2-1 already, it's just newly passed. They support the provisions of our bill and oppose the Senate obstructing it. So I have confidence in public opinion. Also, when it's bipartisan across the country, we have less than $1 trillion that goes to states, localities, tribes, and territorial governments that provide jobs for people across the country. So we have Democratic and Republican mayors, governors, county executives, and the rest very enthusiastic about the legislation and making their voices known to the members of the United States Senate. This is very unusual that we have such a strong bipartisan advocacy for legislation of this kind, which is meeting resistance in the Senate. But I don't think for long, because what we have in the bill is disciplined, it's focused, it's all necessary, and it has broad bipartisan support in the country. It's just a matter of time. They want to pause, but as I've said here before, hunger doesn't take a pause. Losing your job doesn't take a pause. All of the paying the rent doesn't take a pause. We really need to meet the needs of the American people and at the same time provide stimulus to the economy. And even Secretary, as you know,
sorry.
I was just saying that you mentioned Mnuchin, but also the head of the Fed, the chairman of the Fed, Powell, has said that it's responsibility of elected representatives to use the tax and spend responsibilities that we have in a way that helps the economy. And he has indicated that there's need for more.
I wanted to ask you also about the Inspector General controversy, but just one quick thought about China, because another thing that appears to have bipartisan support right now on Capitol Hill is some legislation, including possibly delisting some Chinese company. Is that going to make it? It's been through the Senate. Is it going to make it through the House? And might it have ramifications for the markets overall?
This is something we just learned of. It passed with unanimous consent, so there wasn't much debate or we don't know who voted. It was unanimous consent. So we'll review it in the House. I've asked my committees to take a look at what that is. I take second place to no one in the Congress, House, or Senate. And my criticisms of China's trade policies vis-a-vis the United States over decades, their human rights policies, their proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Right now, whether it's the Uyghurs, the people of Hong Kong, Tibet, you name it, they have been very oppressive and even more so. But the fact is that we have to judge we have to have a relationship with China, and we judge every action as to what it means to us as well as what it means to them. So I'll look forward to seeing that. It's interesting that it had such unanimous support, though, in the Senate.
Madam Speaker, I do want to ask about the Inspector General issue. We know that the President of the United States dismissed the State Department Inspector General, apparently at the request of Secretary Pompeo. You've expressed some objection to that. Was it within the President's rights to dismiss him?
Well, the President can fire any federal employee within his range. I mean, there's some who are protected, but he has a right to fire him. But it is also essential for him to tell the American people and the Congress of the United States why. Why? Because these inspectors general were instituted following Watergate. Their purpose was to be watchdogs as to behavior, whether it's waste, fraud, abuse, or any other abuse of power that some in the agencies might engage in. This is a protection for the American people, and they are respected throughout the decades since then. So this is a demonstration of a power, of the fear that this administration has of the truth. These inspectors general are by and large apolitical. Some have served both parties, both presidents from one to the next. So it's not anything partisan about it. And every business, as you know, in the private sector, you have compliance officers, and the press, you have ombudsmen, and here we have inspectors general. Again, they're afraid of the truth that these inspector generals, and it's a pattern. This is a pattern of firing inspectors general. It's just wrong. It's scandalous, really, and we want to know why.
Well, exactly. That's the question of why, and there have been conflicting reports I've read, at least in the press, about why. I believe you've asked for Secretary Pompeo actually to come up and testify in front of Congress. Are you confident you can get him to come up and explain to you what happened?
Well, the administration, again, is afraid of the truth, so they have sort of muzzled many of their people who have a responsibility to report to Congress. But that doesn't mean that we're not asking for him to come up and actually for Congress to exercise its oversight responsibilities over policy. Now, there have been talk about personal errands and this or that, and there have been talk about use of federal funds to entertain that might accrue to his political advantage. I'm very concerned about the fact that this inspector general may have been looking into the false emergency that was declared by the administration in terms of arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Right. Somehow or other, Saudi Arabia and Russia, they seem to be the pet countries of the president. He always wants to do something extraordinary for them.
Madam Speaker, it's always such a treat to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And President Trump today has said he's tested negative for the coronavirus. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury, the Times Square edition, a collaboration between hotel industry icon Ian Schrager and Marriott, opened to great fanfare last year. Diana Ross and Kendall Jenner came to party. Now it's slated to close permanently in August. The $2.4 billion property is the latest Midtown hotel to run into trouble as the coronavirus grinds tourism to a halt. Earlier this month, the Hilton Times Square warned investors it may surrender the keys to its lender. As more bills come due, Manhattan's glut of empty hotels may even be converted into affordable housing or homeless facilities. Nordstrom is also pulling the plug on the famed fashion boutique Jeffrey. Jeffrey Kalinsky, who founded the chain in the 90s, will retire. Jeffrey is famous for putting New York City's meatpacking district on the map, expanding later to Atlanta and Palo Alto. The personal luxury goods market could contract by 20 to 35% for the full year, according to a report by Bain & Company. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio. You're living in a world built on science, political and economic.
You've got to believe the labor market gets hit.
Computer and medical.
Clarify where we are on a test.
It all makes a difference.
What do you think needs to happen in terms of governmental response?
And it's all here.
He expects the virus to peak quite a long time from now.
Get your science straight.
The hand washing campaign, is this actually a good strategy?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Jenny Liss, Jewish communal leader and philanthropist, talks about why she chose the Jewish Communal Fund for her family's charitable giving.
For a lot of people, it would be the convenience factor. I don't have to track anything.
If charitable giving is an important part of your life, JCF can help you organize your philanthropy with our donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a minimum tax-deductible contribution of $5,000. Make grants to your favorite charities, and JCF handles all the administration and reporting.
At the year end, our board awards community grants from fees and endowment income to UJ's annual campaign. We also make gifts to specific organizations, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, the hungry. The fact that we come together as a community at the end of the year to build community, that's what makes us different.
Get better at giving back. To find out more about JCF's impact, visit jcfny.org and download the Giving Report. JCF, we have a gift for giving.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A move lower for the U.S. equity market as rising trade tensions between the U.S. and China add to concern about the pace of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Crude oil has erased gains, trading lower now by 0.1%, $34.46 a barrel. S&P 500 index is lower, down 20 points. That is a drop there of 0.7%. The Fed's Vice Chairman Richard Clarida says more fiscal and monetary support may be called for. That headline now crossing the Bloomberg Professional Service. S&P lower with signs mounting that President Trump will make his tough on China stance a key element of his re-election bid. We've got the Dow down 90 points, lower by 0.4%. NASDAQ down 66. That is a drop of 0.7%. 10-year up 5/30 seconds. Yield now 0.66%. Gold is down 1.3% at $17.24 the ounce. Shopify says it will allow its 5,000 employees to work from home indefinitely, even after the dangers of the coronavirus pandemic fade and cities lift shutdowns. A similar announcement was made last week by Twitter. Millions more Americans applied for unemployment benefits last week, indicating major job losses are continuing 2 months after the coronavirus pandemic started shuttering businesses. The Labor Department said initial claims for regular state programs totaled 2.44 million in the week ending May 16th. The prior week's number was revised down by 294,000 to 2.69 million after a clerical error by Connecticut labor officials inflated the overall nationwide number. And now, with a closer look at commodities, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
Crude oil is reacting after a drop in U.S. crude stockpiles, which are adding to signs that the market is starting to balance. European manufacturing data is also better than expected, signaling a potential pickup in demand. And gold investors are taking to profits ahead of the long holiday weekend in some markets. UBS Global Wealth Management says gold still holds appeal, with prices seen reaching as much as $1,800 an ounce this year and an upside potential for a record 2,000. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, gold down 1.4%, $17.24 the ounce. Crude turning around, up now by 0.3%, $33.58 a barrel. 102 on Wall Street means it's time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. Here's Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are falling more than U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is down 1.1%, and the S&P 500 is lower by 0.75%. Chinese ADRs are down after the U.S. Senate passed a bill that may lead to delistings. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just told Bloomberg Television she'll ask lawmakers to review that legislation. In the meantime, you have the online retailer Alibaba Group down 3.1% in U.S. trading, and rival JD.com is down 3.9%. Belgium's Galapagos has declined 7%. A lower dosage of the company's proposed treatment for ulcerative colitis failed to meet the goal of a late-stage study. Galapagos is developing the treatment with U.S.-based Gilead Sciences. The UK's Whitbread has lost almost 10.5%. The hotel and restaurant owner is raising $1.2 billion from shareholders through a rights issue. Whitbread suspended its dividend and received waivers of debt covenants from its lenders. Ireland's Ryanair has gained 5.4%. The ADRs have moved higher every day this week as the discount airline has raised cash by tapping a UK government loan program. Ryanair is up for the week about 30%, and that would be the biggest four-day advance, Charlie, since 2004.
Wow, what a story. Thank you very much. That is our Dave Wilson keeping track of those American depository receipts. Again, recapping, equities lower across the board, pairing losses now looking at a 13-point drop in the S&P, down by 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We want
unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
The fight over how we're going to vote this November. The Department of Justice gets ready for its own fight against Google, and U.S. businesses fight to reassure customers and workers as the country begins to reopen for business. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. All 50 states have now at least begun to ease their restrictions on social and business interaction, even as another 2.4 million Americans lost their jobs last week, and Congress debates further assistance. We welcome now Neil Bradley, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer. So thanks for being back with us, Neil. Give us a sense of where we are. We just talked with Nancy Pelosi, who said that she's confident that she can get some version of her HEROES Act through. We hear from President Trump today that he's working with Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, on some package. Where do you think things stand?
Well, thanks for having me, David. You know, we're really in a crucial moment right now, and in the coming weeks, we are going to have to bridge the divides between the House and the Senate and Republicans and Democrats to get a Phase 4 bill done. Failure can't be an option here. The good news is I think the differences are bridgeable. They're vast, but bridgeable.
I don't understand the timing, Neil. Maybe I'm not meant to. But on the one hand, Nancy Pelosi and others say we got to get this and we got to get it soon, as we even see layoffs potentially from state and local workers, those sorts of things. On the other hand, we keep hearing from Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, yes, there needs to be help, but no big rush. Is there a rush or not?
Well, I think it depends on which elements of the bill that we're talking about. So at the U.S. Chamber, one of our priorities is providing a safe harbor for businesses that reopen against frivolous litigation. Businesses, as you pointed out in the opening, are opening in all 50 states today. And, you know, one of the things that we can do is reassure them that as they take steps to protect the health of their employees and customers, they're not going to be second-guessed in litigation a year from now. That needs to happen now to provide that confidence to employers. There are other areas where we might be able to wait a little bit of time, but time is not on our side if we want to boost confidence and we want to help turn reopening into recovery.
Well, what about that issue about liability? Because it seems to be a real sticking point. We have certainly some Democrats saying, boy, we cannot possibly give on that. It's not clear to me, maybe it is to you, whether the Speaker of the House would be willing to compromise on it. But how much progress are you making on that issue? Do you think that ultimately there will be some sort of safe harbor or immunity protection?
I do believe there'll be a safe harbor. It won't be immunity, and in fact, we're not asking for immunity. We believe that there ought to be a good faith safe harbor here. And if you're a business who's complying with the public health guidance from the CDC, OSHA, your state officials, you shouldn't have to be worried about being second-guessed. However, if you're a bad actor, if you're being negligent, if you're engaging in misconduct, you should be held accountable. And we think that's kind of the spot that there can be consensus amongst Republicans and Democrats.
Neil, one of the issues that's really come to the fore, and several people have mentioned this, is that it's not just a question of opening up. It's a question of having people be comfortable enough, feel safe enough, whether they're workers or their customers, to come back into the restaurant, come back into the store. What did the businesses of America need to give that sort of reassurance to the public, it's okay?
You're exactly right. One of the most important things that businesses can do, and at the U.S. Chamber, this is what we're telling our members, is you have to over-communicate with your employees and with your customers about the steps that you're taking to protect their health. And so it needs to be visible communication. For example, at the Chamber website, we have signs that businesses can download to post to tell everyone the steps that they're taking to protect public health. We think very visible communications is the key to restoring confidence so that folks feel comfortable going back to work or going out and being consumers again.
So, Neil, we continue to get economic data out that are really discouraging. They might be better than expected, but they're really bad. We had it with the PMIs today. We had it with 2.4 million more Americans losing their jobs. At the same time, we hear from people, and this includes, for example, the chairman of the Fed saying that, in fact, he expects sort of it to come back in the second half of the year. Are you seeing any evidence of that in businesses, your members?
Well, we are, and given the depth of how far we've fallen, I don't think there's any option but for it to return. I mean, we basically put the economy on pause, and now we're restarting. The question is how quickly things resume and how fully they resume, and that's going to make the difference between not just economic growth levels, but how quickly we can bring down those unemployment numbers. It's not just about restarting; it's about restarting at a pace that allows us to bring those workers back into the workforce and substitute, paychecks for unemployment checks.
We heard from the Dallas Fed president yesterday, Rob Kaplan, saying what we really need is we need a Manhattan Project, not for vaccines, but for testing. Are you pressing for more extensive testing? Because a lot of people think that would give people a lot more confidence, whether they are workers or they are customers.
Yeah, restoring confidence is a multifaceted aspect to it. Testing is certainly a part of it, and we are continually making progress on the availability of testing, and that's very positive. There are also going to be other aspects to it. So, therapeutics, a vaccine, and just the sense that people are taking steps to improve the hygienics of the physical locations that we visit. All of those things collectively contribute to restoring confidence.
Yeah, and it can't come too soon, that's for sure. Is your number one priority the HEROES Act or whatever the next round is called?
Well, our number one priority is a timely, targeted bill that includes some temporary provisions to address the things that we need to reopen, restart, and grow again.
Okay, thank you so much. Always great to have you with us. That's Neil Bradley of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Coming up, we're going to talk with Bloomberg Opinion's Brian Chapata about those 20-year bonds that got sold yesterday. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This probably wasn't what you expected.
Deaths from the coronavirus continue to climb.
But now you need to become an expert fast.
For the very latest, we're joined live.
You'll do it with the latest information, and we'll be right here to help.
Are you concerned that the economic damage could linger longer than the virus itself?
Bloomberg Daybreak with Karen Moscow and Nathan Hager. Weekday mornings at 5 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics, and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the Terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
This is a message from the government. There is new guidance to help businesses and employees who cannot work from home be COVID-19 secure at work. The advice will help you conduct a risk assessment, put social distancing measures in place, improve hygiene and cleaning in the workplace, and look after the well-being of your employees. Every workplace is different. Use the guidance to make your business COVID-19 secure. Access the support you need at gov.uk/working safely. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Picture in your mind a stylish Audi with striking LED headlights, sporty alloy wheels, and some of our most advanced features, including a 10-inch digital cockpit and smart assistance systems like lane departure warning. Picture what that Audi looks like. Now think smaller. The Audi A1. It's not a small car, it's a small Audi. Visit audi.co.uk. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Thanks to National Lottery players, the Emerald Centre are now providing emergency food supplies and support for people in Bedfordshire like Alan. Thank you. And £600 million of National Lottery funding is on its way to thousands more local projects in England and across the UK during these exceptional times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen.
Helen is dreaming of fighting a flock of 40-foot flamingos. But in reality, she's helping fight COVID-19 in her sleep. Like thousands of others, she's joined the Dream Team. By using the Dream Lab app, they're helping scientists speed up the search for potential treatments. I'll fight you. Keep fighting, Helen. Search Vodafone Dream Lab and join the Dream Team tonight.
DreamLab app is owned by Vodafone Foundation, an independent charity. Registration number 1089625. Full terms at vodafone.co.uk/dreamlab.
Right now, we're all depending on the digital world that little bit more. And Barclays Digital Eagles are here to help everyone develop the skills they need. From Tea and Teach, supporting those who are new online, to Code Playground, teaching kids how to code. Since 2013, we've been helping everyone develop digital skills. And now more than ever, we're here to help. To find out more, search Digital Eagles. Barclays, we're working to make money work for you.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all retreating right now. Stocks are falling as trade tension between the U.S. and China adds to concern about the pace of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. S&P now lower by 15 points, a drop of 0.5%. The Dow is down 56. That is a drop of 0.2%. And NASDAQ is down 57, a drop there of 0.6%. The 10-year up 2/32 with a yield of 0.67%. Gold is down 1.4%, $17.23 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up now by 0.5% at $33.64 a barrel. Again, recapping equities lower, S&P down 16, down 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's time now for Bloomberg Opinion, and we welcome today Brian Chapata, who has a piece out on the Bloomberg explaining why actually Secretary Mnuchin was exactly right in his timing him out for the first 20-year Treasury bond auction in, I think, 34 years, if my memory serves. Brian, welcome. So why was this so important to get this right?
Well, so for a while, Stephen Mnuchin has been out saying that maybe an ultra-long Treasury bond would be appealing, 50-year or 100-year maturity. And there's been a lot of pushback on that from the dealer community because they say they can't issue bonds that long regularly and predictably. There might not be enough demand for it. So there's been a lot of hemming and hawing, and eventually in January, Stephen Mnuchin and the Treasury Department came out and said we're going to issue 20-year. So that's not as long as the 30-year bond that's already out there. It's within the curve. It's a bit easier to issue. And yesterday's auction kind of proved that it went along smoothly without a hitch.
Smoothly without a hitch. I mean, it didn't go gangbusters, right? But it was good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Some strategists sort of said that the new kid on the block always gets picked on or whatever. But for the most part, it was right in line with expectations. And the amount that they were issuing to start off, $20 billion, kind of fitting for the 20-year on May 20th, was bigger than people were expecting. So it did well considering that it was bigger than all expectations, and now it's trading, and now it's doing quite well.
Interesting. And is there any sense of how it's going to trade after the fact? I mean, as they have the secondary market now?
Well, everyone's kind of trying to figure things out now. On the Bloomberg terminal, we sort of extrapolated the curve, and it's already, in some ways, trading tight. The yield's already lower than actually some models indicate it should be. So kind of interesting there. But, I mean, the expectation is generally that it's going to take a while for it to build up and for it to get any sort of reliable trading volume for the market, which is obviously $17 trillion in size in total. So $20 billion sounds like a lot, but it's actually pretty small potatoes.
But it couldn't come at a more fortunate time for the United States government, right? Given what's going on with the spending that's going on, trillions and trillions of dollars, and the deficit going up and up and up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reliable and predictable mantra that the Treasury Department has talked about has never been more important than it is right now, because auctions have to increase in size continually throughout the year. $4 trillion deficit potentially coming around the corner. So they're going to need all of this issuance to be coming every month, and the 20-year does that, whereas the 50-year, there was some talk that they may have to issue a very small size and maybe even not even do it monthly, maybe do it quarterly. That's not something they can afford to do right now. They needed to add something that they could just throw in there in a pretty large size, and the 20-year kind of covers it.
So they threw in a pretty large size. Will it reignite some of the discussion on the 50 to say this is sort of like a step in that direction? If that went that well, maybe we can start talking about 50s?
It's possible. I think that the fact that you're able to bring a new maturity to market quite easily certainly makes the case that they could do more. They could go out to 50 years, but I don't think that's what they necessarily want to do right now when you have such a large deficit that you have to finance. I think maybe once the economy turns the corner, we're able to dial back the relief programs and their large costs, then maybe they might say, okay, actually, maybe we want to go even longer. Rates are still historically low. And hey, by the way, we have all these pension funds out there that need to make their returns that have long-term horizons. Maybe it makes sense to go long.
So, Brian, I've never been a bond trader. How does this work with U.S. Treasury when they do something like this that I say they haven't done in a long time with the 20-year bond? Do they go out and sort of advance test it, sort of dip their toe in the water with the primary dealers and with the people like that to say, how would this go over?
I mean, I think certainly there's probably some of that behind the scenes. I've heard anecdotally that back in the early 1980s when inflation was rampant and there was just no interest in Treasury bonds, that it felt like there were some like backdoor deals being made. But I think right now, I mean, the primary dealer community was saying do the 20-year bond, not the 50-year bond. So they were the ones who were saying to do it. So I think the Treasury Department probably had a lot of confidence that they'd be able to take it down. But the 20-year just does, it works the same way as all the other auctions. It's a Dutch auction. Everyone puts in their bids, and they fill it up until the quota is met, effectively.
Is there an unlimited appetite for U.S. Treasuries? I mean, and I say that hoping that the answer is yes, given how much we're going to have to borrow.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, ultimately, the Fed is in there buying a lot of these maturities. There was some research that sort of showed that almost all the similar maturities of the current 20-year bond, the Fed owns about 70% of them, of the outstanding amount of those, which is the maximum cap that they can hold of any single Treasury bond. So at the end of the day, the Fed clearly wants to make sure that rates are under control. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell has basically said our balance sheet is unlimited, doesn't really have an impact on inflation, so we're going to keep buying. And the Fed minutes yesterday actually also suggested that some participants are thinking about using those purchases to do explicit yield curve control at the shorter end of the Treasury curve.
Well, so whether you call it monetization or not, insofar as Secretary Mnuchin had a success yesterday, he may owe a thank you note to Chair Powell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, whether you call it monetizing or not, it's kind of an open question. But right now, it's pretty clear that that's kind of the path that the U.S. is going down. The Fed is taking down a lot of treasuries in order to keep the market smoothly functioning during this time when a lot more of the bonds and notes and bills are coming to market.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Brian. That is Brian Chapata from Bloomberg Opinion. And you can read more on this and other stories from Bloomberg Opinion at Bloomberg.com/opinion and on the terminal by typing in OPI and go. Coming up, whenever there's trillions of dollars involved, and goodness knows there are right now, tax policy can't be far away. We talk with PwC's Rohit Kumar about the tax aspects of Congress's efforts to help the economy and get into the intricacies of the net operating loss carryback. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Americans by the millions continue to file for initial jobless claims. 2.4 million people applied for unemployment benefits last week. That brings the total to 38.6 million for the past 2 months since the coronavirus pandemic began. Delinquencies on home loans rose by 1.6 million in April. It was the biggest one-month gain ever, as soaring job losses fueled a 90% jump in missed payments. Retailer Victoria's Secret intends to open its stores by the end of July, and going out of business sales will begin at a quarter of those stores after that. Victoria's Secret says it plans to close 251 stores in North America by the end of the year. On Wall Street, the Dow is falling 57 points, Nasdaq down 52, S&P 500 dropping 13. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
With COVID-19, so much is unknown.
Is this the worst you've seen?
But we are committed to getting you every piece of information we can as soon as we can.
Tell us about this first big win you have. What is it, 24 million N95 masks?
Fewer unknowns.
Who's winning here? Where is the pressure right now?
That's our goal.
What worries you the most? The time it's going to take for a vaccine?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went up high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just
carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We've unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Coming up on Balance of Power, one of the ways Congress has tried to help businesses during the crisis has been in easing some of the tax burden. Rohit Kumar of PwC is here to take us through why not everyone is happy. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
I thank you very much, David Weston. Happy Thursday. Let's begin with the Federal Reserve and Vice Chair Richard Clarida. He says U.S. policymakers may need to provide the battered economy with additional support beyond the unprecedented actions they've already taken. In a speech to the New York Association for Business Economics, Clarida said, quote, depending on the course the virus takes and the depth and duration of the downturn it causes, additional support from both monetary and fiscal policies may be called for. It is a down day on Wall Street. China trade tensions sending stocks lower, with the S&P down 19, a drop of 0.7%. The Dow is down 94, a drop of 0.4%, and Nasdaq down 65, a drop there of 0.7%. Right now we have got the 10-year. The yield is 0.67%. The 10-year up by 1/32. Gold down 1.4%, 17.23 the ounce, and crude oil now up by 0.6%, 33.67 a barrel. Almost 40 million jobless claims have been filed since the coronavirus swept the nation in March. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Workers filed 2.4 million more jobless claims last week as furloughs and job cuts shocked the economy. The data underscore forecasts that the unemployment rate could hit 20% at least in the short haul. It rose to 14.7% in April, rivaling the Great Depression of the 1930s. That said, some workers are being called back as shutdown orders are lifted. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, recapping equities lower across the board here, with the S&P down 19, down 0.7%. Nasdaq down 67, down 0.7. The Dow is down 91. That is a drop of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. One of the provisions in the CARES Act modified tax treatment for businesses' net operating loss, putting more cash in the pockets of companies so they could, in theory, keep more employees on the payroll. But a group of Democrats on the Hill are seeking to undo those provisions, saying that they don't accomplish what was intended, at least not when it comes to large corporations. To take us through the ins and outs of tax law in the time of the pandemic, we welcome now Rohit Kumar. He is PwC Tax Policy Services Leader. Mr. Kumar earlier served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. So, Rohit, thank you so much for being back with us. First of all, for those of us who are not tax lawyers, take us through exactly what this change meant.
So the change in the CARES Act that has now gotten a lot of maybe unwarranted attention would allow companies to take losses experienced in 2018, 2019, 2020 and carry them back up to 5 years. So that, in a situation where a taxpayer paid a lot of tax, 3, 4, 5 years ago, but now is experiencing severe downturn, right, due to the pandemic-induced sort of recession that we're in,
would allow them to sort of even out their tax liability over a sort of the business cycle, which is actually fairly common. We don't let individuals do this, but on the business side of the code, it's pretty common that we let businesses smooth out their tax liability over several years to reflect just the natural course of a business cycle. Now, NOLs NOLs or net operating losses previously had been allowed to have been carried back, but as a part of the 2017 statute, carrybacks were disallowed and you could only carry them forward. You could carry forward indefinitely. There was a little haircut on how much you could use in any given year, but you kept them as an attribute, but only on a go-forward basis. Of course, in the middle of a crisis, it's nice to be able to use them down the road, but you may not survive to down the road, and so you needed to be able to allow companies to carry them back to create some immediate liquidity to forestall other cost-saving measures like laying off employees or even worse yet, going bankrupt and liquidating the operation entirely.
So as a practical matter, then you would have a refund from the government because if you'd paid taxes in the past years and now you more than offset those with losses this year, you'd have a refund. You'd have to wait for that, though, would you? Would you have the cash right away?
You would. So there was a process for which you could quickly access those refunds. There was a mechanism that the IRS established. Of course, the IRS was undergoing its own stress as everyone was teleworking, not just private sector employees, but public sector as well. But there was a mechanism to access that cash relatively quickly. And you put it exactly right, David. This was a refund of tax already paid. So this is not like a loan or a grant from the government. This is just refunding taxes already paid in previous years when things were obviously much better than they are right now.
But unlike some of the loans that can turn into grants, if you use it for payroll, 75% I think is the restrictions like that, there were no restrictions on this. You didn't have to use it to keep your employees in the payroll. Is that right?
No, you didn't. But of course, I mean, let's not forget money is the ultimately fungible asset. And so regardless of whether you specified what a company did with it or didn't do with it, that money certainly was available for payroll. And as we've seen, right, with just in the market report, 40 million filing for unemployment, I mean, folks are being laid off, and they're being laid off as a direct result of the economic crisis that we're in. And so anything we can do to forestall that ought to be seen as a virtue.
So what is the objection of some Democrats who are proposing to undo this up on the Hill? I guess they're saying maybe that works for small companies, but not for big?
Yeah, so I think the objections are, I mean, some of it is more sort of generalized ideology here, which is that, you know, something that benefits large businesses is maybe to be frowned upon a little bit. And then some of the objection is that, well, you know, you're carrying back losses that were realized in 2018, 2019, 2020 when the corporate rate was 21%, and carrying them back to a year pre-TCJA, before the change in the tax code, where the tax rate was 35%. And so there's a rate arbitrage that happens between the 21% year and the 35% rate year. And that's true as a factual matter. What it perhaps ignores is over the last 50 years, Congress has changed the federal headline tax rate some 5 or 6 times, and never have we sort of said your NOLs are only creditable at the rate at which the year in which they were earned. And likewise, if you had losses in 2016, 2017, before the tax law changed, and you had those losses in a 35% year, and you're carrying them forward into 2019, 20, 2021, when it's a 21% rate year, you're getting a negative rate arbitrage, right? That's bad for the taxpayer. So we've not historically tried to deal with that. We've just sort of said, look, there's going to be a rate change. There are going to be winners and losers on both sides of the rate change, but we're not going to try to, you know, create a sort of a wall at the rate change year as to the treatment of losses. That's not to say that we couldn't change our mind, but we should at least acknowledge there's no precedent for doing this over at least the last 50 years.
Rohit, if I'm a CEO or perhaps a CFO right now of a good-sized company, how do I know what the rules are going to be? I mean, is there a realistic prospect that this will get undone? Because there's also a tax planning issue here.
There is, and so I think the odds of a change happening here are quite low. Chairman Grassley, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, has given a floor speech recently sort of defending the treatment that was embodied in the CARES Act. And let's not forget, I mean, the fundamental purpose of this was to create liquidity for businesses in order to support their ongoing operations, to include their payroll, but also their rent and other fixed obligations at a time of economic downturn. And, you know, it's a little bit difficult to love the job but hate the employer. And that sort of feels like where we're headed with this. And we have to acknowledge that if we want people to stay employed, they have to have businesses, employers that they can work for.
Rohit, finally, on a very large level, what are you advising clients right now? Are you advising them sooner or later the tax rates, particularly corporate tax rates, are going to have to go up because sooner or later we're going to have to pay for all this trillions of dollars?
There's certainly some risk that corporate rates go up at some point down the road, but I don't view that as a near-term risk. I think all parties acknowledge in the middle of a downturn or when the economy is just in the early stages of recovery is the exact wrong time to engage in measures that would be sort of fiscally depressive in their orientation, and certainly raising taxes would fall into that category. When we come clear of this, however long that takes, then we'll take a look around and see where the fiscal gap is. But we'll also have to pay attention to what the rest of the world is doing, because we don't operate in a silo. And if the rest of the world is still operating at, corporate tax rates at or about where we are right now, it's not to say that we couldn't go up a point or so or two, but you can't get too out of whack with the rest of the world, or you create distortions and you see companies trying to find a way to re-domicile into some foreign jurisdiction, and we don't want that either.
Rohit, thank you so much. Always great to have you here. That is PwC's Rohit Kumar. Coming up, the Department of Justice reportedly is getting ready to sue Google for violation of the antitrust laws. We talk with a former official at both DOJ and the FTC about what the case likely entails. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
You're living in a world.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
Be part of the sports conversation with Sports Talk Radio on TuneIn. Join the discussion around your favorite local teams with sports stations broadcasting in your area.
The game will be 185 to 183 and somebody wins, whatever. Football, it's either full go or it's not. You got it's thud. I can practice what they call
Follow national storylines and debates with ESPN Radio.
Does the NBA have a hiring problem when it comes to front office jobs in the leagues and a minority hiring issue? Stephen A. chimed in on that today on First Take.
It also resonates with me, Max. You can appreciate this position. One of the candidates was Brian Colangelo. We know what happened. I like Brian, but we know.
And hear what's happening worldwide with international channels like Talk Sport.
Seems as I'm sort of doing my life in reverse at the moment. I was on cricket tours when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 31. I'm out sat at home injured playing PlayStation. So it's a tournament basically where you create your own character.
In your backyard and around the globe, keep your finger on the pulse of the sports world with TuneIn. Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post.
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in a front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I went up high school here in New York
Find these and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
This is Darren Waller. Good to have you.
Yes, sir. It's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Rise to the 5! Touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Down Thursday with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining. Rising trade tension between the U.S. and China, adding to concern about the pace of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Crude oil's been fluctuating, the dollar strengthening. Right now, West Texas Intermediate crude up 1%, $33.81 a barrel, higher by 31 cents. We've got gold down 1.4%, $17.23 the ounce. The S&P 500 index have been down as much as 1.1%, now down 0.5%, lower by 16 points at 29.55. The Dow is down 66, down 0.3%, and NASDAQ is down 55, a drop of 0.6%. 10-year up 230 seconds with a yield of 0.67%. Again, recapping, equities lower with the S&P down 16, a drop of 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, David Weston, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. From New York, this is Balance of Power. The Department of Justice and a group of states have been investigating Google for possible violations of antitrust laws. And word this week is that a complaint may be filed this summer. Here to take us through the issues is David Balto, who served both as a trial lawyer in the Department of Justice Antitrust Division and as policy director at the Federal Trade Commission. So, David, thank you so much for being back with us. What do we know or think we know about this possible complaint?
Well, there is not a great deal of information because these investigations are not public. Outside the United States, the focus of complaints against Google have been based on both the ad tech and search areas.
So give us a sense, is this a Section 1 case? Is this a monopolization case, do we think?
This is a monopolization case, and it's critical to understand that the lodestar of the antitrust laws, the thing that guides all courts, is how consumers are affected. And ultimately, it'll be the Justice Department's burden to demonstrate consumers are paying more or receiving worse services because of alleged anti-competitive conduct by Google.
And as I recall, you start out with market power. How much market power do you have? And you need to have a pretty big market share traditionally, I think, in a Section 1 case. In search, Google clearly has a very large market share, I believe. But what about in ad tech? Does it have a big market share there as well?
Well, market share is only the beginning of the analysis, and Google is significant, of a significant size. An important thing to keep in mind, though, under the antitrust laws, is the purpose of the antitrust laws is not to punish success. Simply because a firm becomes large and profitable doesn't mean it's breaking the law. It has to engage in conduct that's predatory, that doesn't make economic sense in order to violate the law. And that's going to be the crux of any enforcement action against Google.
And it's usually the bad acts, as they're called, are either in acquiring the monopoly power or in using it once you have it. Do we know whether they're looking at acquisitions here as possibly a violation of Section 1, if in fact that's what the complaint is, or is it really what they've done once they had the market power?
No, it's a question of whether their acts have been predatory, and this is the thorniest issue under antitrust law, because we want firms to compete very aggressively. We want them to go and slash prices and go head-to-head and brutalize their rivals, because consumers benefit when competition is aggressive. So it's very hard to detect fair competition from predatory competition, but what's essential, and what they found in the Microsoft case 20 years ago, was that Microsoft engaged in conduct that just simply didn't make economic sense. They're willing, other than the impact on excluding its rivals. And you just don't see that evidence, no matter how carefully you look at Google's conduct here. You don't see conduct that does not make economic sense.
Well, I'm glad you raised the Microsoft case, because I think that was the last really big antitrust case brought by the Department of Justice. But as I recall, after losing at the trial level, actually Microsoft prevailed in Court of Appeals, and then they ultimately settled the case, didn't they? So did Microsoft really lose that case?
Well, there's an interesting debate there, and people, take both sides of that question there. I mean, technically there was, a finding of a violation and a consent decree entered into. But it's amazing. It's one thing a court, remember, a court is going to be the final arbiter here. The Justice Department doesn't say what's legal or illegal. A court has to do that. One of the things a court's going to consider is what's it going to do at the end of the day if it thinks there is a problem? Is it going to become the regulator of search? Is it going to become the regulator of the ad tech market? It would take a whole agency to do either of those things. And that's why courts tend to want to rely on the free market to bring about the best results for consumers, because they know regulating these markets would be an impossible task.
So as you say, David, ultimately the question is there a victim? If there is a victim here, who is it? If in fact it is in the online advertising business, which goodness knows Google does have a very strong position in, who would be the victim here?
Well, it would be, conceivably, it would be large advertisers, or on the publishing side of the market, it would be firms like News Corp and Comcast. And what you see in both of these segments of the market are the indicia of highly competitive markets. Prices going down, the number of firms entering the market are increasing. You don't see the kinds of things you'd expect to see if a monopolist really were foreclosing competition. In that kind of market, you would see firms exiting, and you just don't see that in this marketplace.
Now there is a report that I've seen summarized. I have not read the report itself, from Fiona Scott Morton, who was a senior economist, I think, at the Antitrust Division, who actually went back to the UK's Competition and Markets Authority and dug out a lot of information about ad serving that suggested, in fact, that Google was advantaging its own products and disadvantaging others. Have you reviewed that? Is there some claim there that makes some sense?
I have reviewed it, and it certainly raises a number of questions that the Justice Department will look at very carefully. But again, at the end of the day, when you look at the ad tech market, first of all, the first question is you have to show that Google is really foreclosing competition by bundling products together. I don't think there's evidence here of coercion. But second, you've got to look at what the actual impact in the market is, and you see the number of competitors actually prospering. Finally, let's go back to the first question, the lodestar of antitrust law. How are consumers affected? Are consumers ultimately paying more? It's not a question about whether these intermediary firms are harmed. It's a question of the effect on the ultimate consumer. And I don't think that story is told well there.
Which, ironically, David, goes back to the ultimate question some people have raised, as you know, Tim Wu and others, saying maybe the antitrust laws that were designed for an industrial world don't work in the new digital world, in a world of network effect, that in fact people can have overwhelming power and in fact suppress innovation and yet have the consumer pay less.
You have to be extraordinarily cautious in this area. Justice Breyer said about 40 years ago in a famous case, the court should be extraordinarily reluctant to challenge any practice that leads to lower, not higher prices, because the authors of the Sherman Act were mostly interested in consumers getting lower prices. So if Tim Wu wants to turn the antitrust laws on its head, good luck with getting Congress to approve that. That doesn't sound like a good recipe for consumers.
Yeah, and finally, we should emphasize these are reports that a complaint may be filed. We don't know whether it will be filed, and even if it is, we don't know whether there will be a settlement. So we have no idea about where this all ends up.
Correct. And most of these cases, when there are competitive problems found, and maybe there are small technical glitches here, we don't know, but firms are smart enough to figure out how to correct things to alleviate competitive concerns that really seem legitimate.
But the one thing we do know for sure, David, is that there'll be a lot of fees being paid to antitrust lawyers. The antitrust bar does all right in these. Thank you so much, David. Really good to have you with us. That is antitrust lawyer David Balto on the possible Google case. That's going to do it for Balance of Power for today. I'm David Weston, and this is Bloomberg.
This pandemic. Thanks to National Lottery players, the Help a Squaddy initiative, and now providing mental health support online for veterans like Darren.
Thank you.
And £600 million of National Lottery funding is on its way to thousands more local projects in England and across the UK during these exceptional times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
The force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. You have that power too.
For the first time ever, stream the complete Skywalker saga, all in one place. 9 incredible films, one epic story, only on Disney+.
The Force will be with you, always.
The Skywalker Saga on Disney+, now streaming. 18+ subscription required. T's and C's apply.
At Moonpig, we've got making people happy down to a science. How? With flowers. Research shows that whether small blossoms or giant blooms, roses or peonies, receiving bouquets of any formation causes our bodies to produce endorphins, or the happy chemical. Thank you, Professor. And you too can harness the power of flowers with Moonpig. It's easy. Send a beautiful hand-tied bouquet of happiness straight from our app with just a couple of taps. Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
The world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed. Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday, May 21st, live from New York and New Jersey, streaming on YouTube. And Jason, we've definitely seen this movie before. Investors getting nervous over rising trade tension between America and China. Put that on top of the ever-present concern about the virus. It's not a good situation.
Well, that's right. And again, millions of people filing for jobless claims. The numbers are tricky to discern. The second week in a row, by the way, where someone has basically misplaced a decimal point. I don't know if you saw that.
Hey, folks, decimal points matter.
Exactly. Check your work. It's amazing how much and how big the numbers are, regardless of decimal points. We know that tens of millions of people have filed for unemployment, and that is certainly dragging on the economy.
All right, we're going to talk about that throughout the next couple of hours and more. But first up, let's get to the markets and to Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
All right. Well, hello there, and happy Thursday to you both. S&P down as much as 1% right now. The S&P is down 17 points. That is a drop of 0.6%, recovering somewhat there, but red on the screen nonetheless. The Dow is down 59, a drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 60, a drop there of 0.65%. As you mentioned, all about rising tensions with China, along with the jobs data. We've got the 10-year up 230 seconds with a yield of 0.67%. Gold down $25 the ounce, tumbling 1.4%, 17.23, and West Texas Intermediate crude now up 0.9%, 33.79 a barrel. NVIDIA will be reporting after the closing bell, recapping equities lower, S&P down 15, down 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
That's right. We'll bring you those NVIDIA numbers and some context when they cross. We're also talking so much about the economic landscape, Carol, and synthesizing what's going on with those China tensions and with what we're hearing domestically. Who better to put all these questions to than Michael McKee? He's going to help us set the Business Week agenda. He's, of course, international economics and policy correspondent for Bloomberg. And with us, as always, Dave Wilson, stocks editor for Bloomberg, author of the Chart and Stock of the Day. Dave, let me start with you. Give me the context, give us the context for this trade right now. Stock's down, not dramatically so, but what are the internals telling you?
No, it's just kind of a blah sort of day in the sense that, you look at what's down. It's not like there's an obvious theme to it. I mean, technology shares are lower. But then again, so are utilities. So it's not like, you can point to the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 and say there's an overall trend. I mean, I suppose one area of the market that jumps out, given that, we're dealing with the back and forth on China, is, the Chinese companies that have American depository receipts. For the most part, they're lower. I mean, you now have the risk, thanks to this bill that was passed in the Senate, that, if these companies can't certify that they're free from government control, that they may end up losing their U.S. listings. And, we're seeing some effect on the ADRs. You take a look at Alibaba Group Holdings as an example. It's down about 2.5%. JD.com, which is a rival of Alibaba, is also down about 2.5%. And we're seeing losses for a whole lot of other smaller companies that trade here in the U.S. that are based in China. So, that is a front and center issue. at this point.
Lots of great stuff on Bloomberg.com, too, about why Chinese companies are still going to want to list on New York exchanges. So check that out. Michael McKee, come on in on this. This is kind of when we love to turn to you when we've got another staggering economic number. We knew it was going to be a rough one again, but what are the things we really have to kind of take away from the number and kind of where we are in the job market?
Yeah, it's kind of weird to talk about 2.4 million people filing for unemployment claims and say, well, gee, that's an improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where we are these days. We're going to start to pivot now and look at continuing claims of people who are still getting benefits. Now, they're not going to match up. 38 million people have filed initial claims. 25 million are now getting continuing claims. Those are delayed a week. They're not going to match up exactly because some people who file for initial claims aren't going to be eligible. But 25 million people right now are getting unemployment checks. And we'll watch that to see if it starts to decline in some states where they're reopening and maybe the PPP program is putting people back on some payrolls. And then if it really starts to go down, then you'll get a sense that we are starting to improve. It's not going to be a very quick thing, but it would be a sign that we've bottomed out. You mentioned, Jason, at the top of the show, the clerical errors. It is the second week in a row. Last week, Connecticut hit an million people extra, and this week it was Massachusetts with the count of the people who normally aren't eligible, but under the pandemic emergency part of this program are able to collect, like people like Uber drivers, gig workers, things like that. They added a million accidentally. I'm going to give them a break because they're so overwhelmed that they got to be looking cross-eyed at their computers.
It's a good thing they're not taking
You're a nice person, Michael.
And I was just going to say, it's a good thing they're not taking a standardized test because they wouldn't get a break on that one. Mike, there's other data points out there. Consumer sentiment, not great, but better than they were, what we saw in April. I don't know. How do you see the economy, especially when you've got U.S., China looking like they're at loggerheads again when it comes to trade?
The domestic economy is poised to recover a little bit. The question is how fast, and as Jay Powell and others have said on a regular basis, it's going to depend on how confident people are that they can go out and shop or eat at restaurants and not get COVID-19. And we just don't know what the psychology is going to be. Polls show people are worried about that. You see anecdotal pictures of people on beaches or 20-somethings at bars, but the vast majority of the people, are they going to go out? We're going to have to wait and see. I talked with Carmen Reinhardt, who was just appointed the new chief economist of the World Bank this morning, and she's really worried about the China developments. She said the last thing we need now is a trade war again, and she brought up the old Depression era trade wars and how they really worsened the downturn.
Did she actually say it's different this time again, just quickly?
No, she said it is. Well, she did. She said it is different this time because we've never seen anything like this before.
Wow, interesting. All right, Michael McKee, thank you so much. Dave Wilson, before you go, give us a tease on your chart. You're going to be back with us around 3:30.
That's right. We'll be talking about initial public offerings. It's like their bear market's already over.
Wow.
That's forward-looking. I like it,
there
Dave.
You go. Looking around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Dave Wilson, Mike McKee, thank you so much. We got to talk about what's coming up because the ever-present voice of the week, Jason, we're going to head to a live event. Jay Powell of the Fed, he'll be there.
I'm hearing this guy in my dreams at this point. I mean, it's like
Really?
It starts Sunday
Really?
night. Yeah, well, it's a sad life that I lead. Come on, it's quarantine. Haven't you heard about all these creepy quarantine dreams everybody's having?
I've had crazy dreams, like all my worlds coming together, past, present, future.
All right, so we're going to hear from Jay Powell. We're also going to hear from U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. She caught up with David Weston earlier. We're also going to talk about a very provocative cover story. You and I were talking about this earlier as we were taping the read to you version of the cover story. Getting into it, it's sharp. Peter Coy.
Right. You can read it. It's on the terminal. It's also going to be in our podcast stream. The title of it, Trump is taking a political gamble with the U.S. economy and maybe your life. It's Peter's take on it. And then I got to get into things we love, Jason. You and I love to travel. We love great hotels. You love watching movies. I do too. Films. Two great voices on that. Ian Schrager. He's led the way from Studio 54 to challenging the hotel industry. He's going to be with us.
And Nancy Spielberg, documentary filmmaker, very well-versed first. Comes from a family of filmmakers, as you can probably guess. So she's going to talk to us our latest conversation about the future of the entertainment business.
All right, let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. One number that tells us a lot. Today's number, nice and round, $1 trillion. It's huge. Cutting women's jobs during the pandemic may wipe $1 trillion off global GDP. That's according to Citi. 44 million workers in vulnerable sectors, about 31 million women face job losses compared with 13 million men. Citi's economists recommended policies such as flexible work and subsidized childcare to help women stay on the job. It's interesting because initially when we went into working from home, we were saying that this might be a good thing for women, right? And showing flexibility. It's not that way.
It is not. And as this unemployment becomes a little more permanent, it sounds like it's going to be even worse. All right, let's get to Bob Moon now. He's got your world and national headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, thank you very much. Signs of renewed activity are surfacing across the country as states gradually reopen economies and some businesses call a portion of their laid-off staffers back to work. Yet with millions more Americans seeking unemployment aid last week, the U.S. job market remains as bleak as it's been in decades. And President Trump has spoken with the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, about additional steps to boost the economy. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Washington.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke in a Bloomberg interview about the improving prospects in the Senate.
Well, I'm optimistic because the American people fully support what we are doing. Democratic and Republican mayors, governors, county executives making their voices known. This is very unusual that we have such a strong bipartisan advocacy for legislation, which is meeting resistance in the Senate. But I don't think for long.
Congress could act sooner on a bill allowing small businesses more than 8 weeks to spend the loan money they received under the previous spending bills. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Pandemic politics are shadowing President Trump's trip to Michigan today to highlight life-saving medical devices, with the president and officials from the electoral battleground state clashing over federal aid, mail-in ballots, and face masks. In Ypsilanti, outside Detroit, Trump is touring a Ford Motor Company factory repurposed to manufacture ventilators. Well, officials say an armed person wounded a sailor at a Texas Naval Air Station at Corpus Christi. The shooter was killed by security forces. Global news 24 hours a day and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
There are times when you have to go it alone. But these should not be those times.
With a medical crisis, can any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, I'm Danica Patrick. Watching my nieces grow, play, and learn is amazing, but not every child gets to be carefree. 1 in 6 kids in the U.S. are hungry. This breaks my heart, and it's something that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and gives it to families in need. To help, visit feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
When you went car shopping, you meant business. You aced vehicle history searches and test drives. You out-salesmaned the salesman. Now you've got your wheels. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll have the info you need to get more for your future. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to speeding past financial challenges, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Market upheavals.
This is a message from the government. There is new guidance to help businesses and employees who cannot work from home be COVID-19 secure at work. The advice will help you conduct a risk assessment. Put social distancing measures in place. Improve hygiene and cleaning in the workplace. And look after the well-being of your employees. Every workplace is different. Use the guidance to make your business COVID-19 secure. Access the support you need at gov.uk/working-safely. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, plays to the 5, touchdown!
Search classic game replays to listen for free.
How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then, whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
The Woj Pod with Adrian Wojnarowski.
Doris, you had reason to believe that you needed to get a test for the coronavirus.
Right. Well, let's just start with the headline, which is I did test positive for COVID-19. I was so tired from Saturday the 14th through Tuesday, March 17th. I kid you not, I could not be out of bed for 5 minutes without needing to go back to bed and lay down.
Search the Woj Pod to listen.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your 7th inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting 9 podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
round the bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelletta. Down day stocks now lower across the board with the S&P down 15, down 0.5%. The Dow down 50, a drop there of 0.2. NASDAQ down 53, a decline of 0.6%. Rising trade tension between the U.S. and China, adding to concern about the pace of recovery recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. The 10-year up 4/32 with a yield of 0.66%. Gold is down 1.5%, $17.22 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil recovering, now up by 1%, up 34 cents a barrel at $33.84. We're about 12 minutes away from Fed Chair Jay Powell. He'll be making opening remarks at a virtual Fed Listens event on how COVID-19 is affecting U.S. communities. We'll have it for you live right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So our top virus headlines at this hour, Charlie mentioning some global virus cases now topping 5 million. They've doubled in the past month. Infections rising at a record pace in Brazil and Indonesia. So we're seeing that certainly in the emerging markets. AstraZeneca, by the way, got $1.2 billion in U.S. funding to develop a vaccine. So there's some of the big picture stuff. Let's get into the virus. We're so glad to have back with us Dr. Amesh Adalja. He is infectious disease physician at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, on the phone from Pittsburgh. And of course, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Radio. Dr. Adalja, nice to have you back with us. I got to ask you something. I want to jump to something that our Mike McKee did an interview with, I believe it was the head of the Dallas Fed. And he said specifically, we needed a Manhattan Project, a federal initiative of testing and tracing in order to really get control of this virus. Is that true?
It is definitely true that we have to have testing and tracing basically as close to perfect as we can, because that's what's going to give people confidence to go about their lives, knowing that there are going to be cases out there, but those cases are going to be handled appropriately. They're going to be found. Their contacts are going to be traced, and we're not going to allow chains of transmission to go undetected and then spill into our hospitals and create havoc like they did in New York earlier. So this is something that needs to be done in every state as we move forward in the era of the pandemic.
And so, Dr. Adalja, what do we know about reopening so far? What have we learned as we look across the country? What's working? What should we be worried about? Or is it too soon to tell?
We know that reopening, just because that's going to allow people to socially interact, will cause more cases to occur, and some of those cases will end up hospitalized. The key has always been about making sure that those cases stay to a level that's manageable by hospitals, because the virus isn't going anywhere. And right now, we haven't seen anything alarming. There are places where cases are going up, and we know that that's going to be the case. We haven't heard about any hospitals running into a problem where they are unable to perform their other operations or other types, or having strains on their personal protective equipment or mechanical ventilators. So everything looks good so far. This is something we have to constantly be vigilant about, though, and continually look at and titrate our response in terms of what social distancing can be removed based on what's going on in the hospital. So far, so good, but I think this is going to be something we have to eternally watch while this virus is around.
What do you make of so far of the pursuit of a vaccine?
This is really something that is going at a very, very fast pace, faster than we've ever seen before. We have multiple candidates in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials using innovative technology that wasn't available even a decade ago. But it's important to remember that even though we're going as fast as we possibly can, vaccine development is something that is measured in years, not necessarily in months. And I don't think it's a good idea to wed ourselves to some exact date when we think that we're going to have a vaccine, because everything has to go perfect. We're just in phase 1 clinical trials for the most part, and we need to get more people studied. We need to understand all of the side effect profiles, because remember, we're going to be vaccinating the entire country or even the entire world, and we want to know even small side effects. And then we have to think about the supply chain of things that are simple, like just the glass vials that you keep the vaccine, and we have to make sure that all of that is put into place, because this is going to be an industrial scale vaccine endeavor like we've never seen before.
How does making it a global effort, though, that with everybody focused on it, help to reduce the timetable? As you said, we've got, there's certain things you just got to have in place, but I do wonder, with everyone so focused on it, does it do something to that timetable? As you said, it usually happens in years, not months, but because of this concentrated and coordinated effort, at least it certainly feels that way, does that mean we can expect it to be done much more quickly?
I do think we will get a vaccine on a quicker pace than we've seen with prior endeavors to make a vaccine on the fly. And I do think that the global energy behind this, the fact that we've got multiple companies in multiple different countries all working on it, will help everybody learn from each other and see what's working, what isn't working. And you have individuals like Bill Gates talking about building factories ahead of time for different candidate vaccines. All of that is going to probably make this the fastest time we get to a vaccine. And certainly true that we've gotten to a vaccine candidate much faster than we have in the past, putting things into phase 1 clinical trials. So I just don't want people to I don't want to overpromise or be overly optimistic, but everything is looking good. But I think we're going to have probably a period of 18 months, 2 years or so before the population is vaccinated. We may get smaller batches before that for healthcare workers or high-risk individuals.
Interesting. So when you think about sort of the other two pieces of the medical stool here, and we've all come to learn things that you know better than anybody else around, we talked about vaccine, but also when it comes to therapeutics and when it comes to the antibody test, where are we on those other two elements?
Well, so the antibody testing is something that's been rolled out kind of in a staggered fashion, and we're starting to get more information that there are better kits out there. Some of the national lab chains like Quest and LabCorp have developed serology tests that they're using as well, and the Roche test is very good. There are some there that have a high rate of false positives, meaning you didn't really have the infection, but it's still reading positive. That we have to be careful about making sure that people don't use those types of tests and that they're using the highly validated one. When it comes to therapeutics, I do think we're in a better position than we were just even a few months ago. There had been some positive news about remdesivir, which is an experimental antiviral which received emergency use authorization from the FDA. This does seem to get people out of the hospital quicker. It is not a panacea. It's not a knockout blow against the virus, but it is one tool that can help us preserve hospital capacity. And it does give you hope that we can make other antivirals. And there are people trying to work on antibody-based therapies, not just from recovered patients, but also synthetic antibodies. So it is looking good, and we'll probably see those types of therapeutics much before we'll see a vaccine.
Dr. Adalja, here we are at this interesting juncture, and Jason and I were planning for our weekend show. We talked a lot about this in relationship to Bloomberg Business Week magazine's cover story about reopening. There's so much discussion about it. Do you delay? Do you go quicker? I mean, no matter what kind of reopening we do, there are going to be some individuals, right, who will be at risk, and some, unfortunately, we will lose their lives. It's just the result of increased social interaction, right? It doesn't matter when we start. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. That's exactly the truth. And I think many people don't appreciate that. The virus didn't go anywhere. So if someone says, I'm going to wait till next week to get my haircut, there's nothing different going to be. Because social distancing, way that those stay-at-home orders were put in place was really just to an eye at hospital capacity. It wasn't going to make things risk-free, and nothing is going to be risk-free in the era of the pandemic. And people are going to have to think about what's important to them, what their personal hierarchy of values are, what they want, what's essential for them to do, what's not essential for them to do, and make these decisions on their own about what risk they're going to tolerate. Because it is true that the virus is here, and now this is something that we have to incorporate into our own risk calculation every time we step out the door.
We're talking with Dr. Amish Adalja. He is infectious disease physician at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. As you can tell by the name, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, supported by Mike Bloomberg, the owner of this radio station, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. So, Dr. Adalja, when it comes to reopening, one of the questions that we hear all the time, whether it's around our dinner tables or when we are talking to folks, is about schools, both elementary schools, secondary schools, and higher ed. We're seeing colleges say they're going to bring students back onto campus. What's your read on the plans so far?
Schools are something that's very controversial, and even the closure of them back in March was something that wasn't completely 100% supported by everybody in my field. And we do know that school closures are something that have lots of negative consequences in terms of how do the students still learn? What about the students that rely on schools for meals? What about the students re-socializing outside of school, especially as stay-at-home orders are lifted? All of that's really important. And what's the impact, the marginal value of closing schools? And there has been a lot of data that show that they are effective at stopping the spread of this. Kids don't magnify this disease the way they do influenza. We know they get infected. We know they have the virus in their nose. We know they have lots of contacts. But we haven't seen data of children driving the epidemiology of this. So I do think that schools are going to probably be one of the first things that reopen. It's going to be controversial. And right now we do have schools open, for example, in Idaho and Montana. These private schools have opened. And I do think that that's going to be something that's done on the state-by-state level, but I do think it should be one of the first things that we start thinking about doing because there are lots of negative consequences to it and not a lot of positive data that actually shows that it's beneficial.
You've been working in infectious diseases for a long time, and I do wonder, what changes going forward in terms of how we approach it as a society. I think for such a long time, certainly the developed world was like, well, that's not something that happens to us. And I do think we are all changed dramatically because of this. I'm just curious, though, you're much smarter than me on this. How do you see it?
This pandemic has touched everybody. Often infectious disease experts that work on emerging infectious diseases and pandemic preparedness and biosecurity are often talking to themselves more than they're talking to the general public. But now we're seeing how impactful a pandemic can be and how important it is to think about pandemic preparedness beforehand, to make those investments ahead of time so that you don't end up in the situation that we're in now. And I do think that going forward, this is going to be something that people think about and try to fortify. And hopefully this won't fall into that same cycle of panic and neglect that we've seen after anthrax or bird flu or H1N1 or Middle East respiratory syndrome or Zika or Ebola, that these things come and go and they disappear from the headlines and then policymakers forget about them, even though they're still there. Hopefully this pandemic and its impact will change that line of thinking.
And what have you learned through all of this? Like, what's been the biggest surprise to you, Dr. Adalja, knowing this so well, and either in terms of the reaction in the public or the reaction even in your community?
The biggest surprise to me is the fact that the United States was the most prepared nation against the pandemic, and we failed miserably at it. Not because we didn't have the plans, not because we didn't know what to do, it's just because it was not executed properly, and there was a lot of politicization that occurred from the get-go that really we still haven't recovered from. When you talk about what happened with testing and the testing protocols and viewing this mostly as a travel-related infection that wasn't going to come here, all of that time that was wasted from January and February and part of March, where the focus was on the wrong actions and not the right actions, which would be increasing diagnostic testing capacity, fortifying our hospitals, public health communication to the general public about what was going to be coming, and getting our public health departments in line to be able to do contact tracing. That to me was surprising. This was all kind of textbook stuff that we've talked about for a long time, and it just didn't occur.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, we've learned so much from you and the whole team at Johns Hopkins, and let's hope we all learn a lot going forward. Dr. Amish Adalja, he's infectious disease physician at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, of course, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. All right, let's take you now to an event where Jay Powell is speaking. It's the Fed Listens event, and it's called How is COVID-19 Affecting Your Community?, moderated by Fed Governor Lael Brainerd. Let's listen in.
Although they are that. What they provide, what you provide, is insight that we just can't get anywhere else. You add depth and definition to the flood of data that flows through the Fed every day. You give us perspective on the economic realities that up on a spreadsheet. You help us see those complex sets of data that analyze the American economy through the eyes of the people, businesses, and communities that make up the American economy. And that information is very helpful to us as we make our policy decisions. So this is a valuable exercise for us and an enjoyable one as well. So we truly do appreciate it on a number of levels. The reserve banks are also continuing to hold conversations in communities across the country to help capture economic realities on the ground. We are in the midst of an economic downturn without modern precedent. It was sudden and it is severe. It has already erased the job gains of the past decade and has inflicted acute pain across the country. And while the burden is widespread, it's not evenly spread. Those taking the brunt of this fallout are those least able to bear it. The pain of this downturn is compounded by the upending of normal life, along with great uncertainty about the future. In the best of times, predicting the path of the economy with any certainty is difficult. In fact, John Kenneth Galbraith famously said that economic forecasting exists to make astrology look respectable. We are now experiencing a whole new level of uncertainty, as questions only the virus can answer complicate the outlook. Policies that address the resumption of economic activity are the province of elected officials at all levels of government in close consultation with public health and medical professionals. But all of us have our own decisions to make as well, and those decisions will depend on public confidence that it's again safe to undertake various activities. From an economic perspective, we hope to learn a lot from your experiences and from what you're hearing from your colleagues, customers, and communities. How they're coping with that uncertainty now, how they're thinking about a future that's harder to plan for, and what matters most as they navigate the path. The feedback we get from our community and business contacts has always been crucial in how we conduct monetary policy. In extraordinary times such as these, it takes on even greater importance. So I want to thank you again for providing that insight, and I very much look forward to our conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Governor Brainerd. Lael, over to you.
Well, thank you.
All right, so that was the introductory remarks given by Fed Chair Jay Powell, as we joked about at the top of the show, Carol. He is the most heard voice this week between his testimony
on a world
Capitol
tour,
Hill.
don't you feel like a little?
Exactly. Ubiquity achieved by the Fed Chair. And listen, he has been one of the voices that we have turned to. The market certainly has turned to. What a far cry it is from when he started this job, and the market would tank as soon as he took the podium at those press conferences after the Fed decisions. He has been a calming force. And, you know, it's interesting. I was messaging with an economist recently and sort of wondering aloud how history would treat Jay Powell. I think very kindly in many ways. And you do wonder if he really is, and I think it's safe to say he probably is, the exact right Fed chair for this moment, given what we are going through and given the importance of the markets and his experience in the finance world.
Got to say hallelujah, because if you think about the financial crisis, having Ben Bernanke, who understood depressions, was a student scholar of depressions and figured out how to help guide us through that one, and absolutely having the right person in the job for what we need. And you're right, he learned very quickly on the job what he needed to do, and we all have a learning curve whenever we start something. So I do think it's been a stable and steady voice, certainly, as we go through this crisis. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Jason Kelly. Let's check in with Charlie Pellet, get a check on some of your top business stories, and again, another check on the trading day. Hi, Charlie.
Thank you very much. Well, hello there again. The Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking and seeing little movement in U.S. stocks as a result of his remarks. You heard him right here on Bloomberg Radio, the Fed Chair Jay Powell saying an unprecedented economic downturn is falling on the most vulnerable Americans, saying, quote, while the burden is widespread, it is not evenly spread. Powell says those taking the brunt of the fallout are the least able to bear it. Here's where we stand. S&P down 15, a drop there of 0.5%. We've got the Dow down 52 points, a decline of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 60, a drop of 0.6%. 10-year up 4/32. The yield right now 0.66%. Gold down 1.5%, 17.22 the ounce. And crude oil, West Texas Intermediate up 1.2%, 33.90 a barrel. Recapping, equities lower with the S&P down 17, down 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Carol Massar here with you on a Thursday afternoon. Yep, we are on the back end of the week, a week where we've heard, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, a lot from the Fed chair. We got some fresh data this morning as it relates to jobless claims and some other economic data as well.
Exactly.
Let's understand what it all means. For that, we turn to Andrew Husby. He is an economist looking at the United States for Bloomberg Economics. He joins us on the phone from New Jersey. So, Andrew, what's the most important thing we need to take at this point from what we've heard from the Fed between testimonies, 60 Minutes, this introduction that we just heard from Jay Powell, and everything else we're hearing?
Sure. Well, thanks. That's obviously the key question right now. And what we'd say is that the message is overwhelmingly that the Federal Reserve is ready to both stand by with its existing programs, potentially expand those as needed. I think a lot of the commentary, you see this reflected in just today at the Fed Chair Powell was at a Fed Listens event, and these events started a while back as the Fed was mulling its new strategy for monetary policy. It was sort of viewed as an information gathering process, but now it's proved both in the past and also now really relevant to sort of gauging the situation situation, the facts on the ground as different sectors of the economy are viewing both normal times and now the crisis. And so instead of dealing with banks, you're hearing a lot more from more members of the community, other business leaders. So again, the main message is the Fed is going to stand by. It's going to use the programs that the Congress has laid out to expand its lending capacity to deal with both Main Street credit facilities and all of this. Putting this all together, that on the face of it, will create a very massive increase in the Fed's balance sheet from something around $4 trillion prior to the crisis to what our Bloomberg economics team thinks could be an expansion to, say, 12 or 13 trillion. Now, it's a large number, but once again, this is generally lending, not spending, and spending, of course, is Congress's job, and that's a key branch of what's going on right now.
Hey, what worries you, Andrew, right now when you look at some of the economic statistics? I say that because we know a lot of the numbers are going to be like nothing we've ever seen. They're going to be to historic high or low levels, depending on what the statistic is specifically. But when you look and you're doing analysis, you're like, you know what, this part really worries me about, how we're going to get that back.
Yeah, sure. Overwhelmingly, the one indicator we're looking at right now is the claims filings, jobless claim filings. We get those weekly, and once again,
got them this morning, right?
Got them this morning, and then what we saw was another rise in what we think is probably the more relevant one to look at for a turning point, and that's the continuing claims figure. Now that will capture, we know, there will be flows into unemployment over the next several weeks and likely months. But what will be key is sort of the net balance between hiring and those layoffs. And that number embedded in the continuing claims figure is still rising, rose quite a bit in data reported.
What does it tell us, Andrew? What does it tell? I'm just thinking for folks who are listening, why it's worrisome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's worrisome because, we're dealing with a period of intense lockdown, and the issue will be whether there are challenges unlocking the economy as the state mandates fall away. Now we're dealing with human behavior. We're dealing with whether businesses feel like they can rehire if there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty, whether in terms of an outbreak later this year, and that is really the key change. So we know that the lockdowns are here and they're starting to ebb, but we don't know exactly how the post lockdown landscape will look. And that's going to be the key challenge. And right now, that rebound, that turning point for a rebound is not yet in.
And so, Andrew, when you guys are trying to discern all of that, it's a really good point about the sort of state by state. Do you and your team sort of like go down a level and look at it on a state by state basis? How do you sort of get a really good picture? Because the national data only tell us so much.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's a limited amount of very high frequency data. We've put together some trackers of weekly or even daily data on the terminal, but you're really looking at the claims data as the timeliest data. So it's really relying on that.
Yeah, I'm curious too around the Bloomberg economics table, Yelena, Carl, your whole team. How much, are you guys talking about protracted recession? Do you even talk about depression, or are you counting on the Fed and hopefully U.S. lawmakers to continue to take the steps to help the economy once we get through this and once we reopen more aggressively?
Sure. Our team is definitely of the view that this will not be a V-shaped rebound. In some sense, it is because of the depth of contraction in Q2 that we're still in the middle of. But we don't see a full recovery for quite some time, several years, in fact. And that's in a pretty optimistic scenario. So we've laid out a few other scenarios where some of the challenges distributing the fiscal policy that doesn't make it to all corners in time. Businesses closed. There are more bankruptcies. And that really does result in a scenario that that recovery to pre-crisis levels is pushed back even further. So you put that all together, and we do expect Congress will enact more fiscal policy later this year, and not even that much later this year. I think lawmakers are certainly looking at putting something together. Both parties knowing that there is an election coming. So expect.
That's a good point. The politics certainly do enter into this. All right. Great analysis. Thank you so much. Andrew Husby is U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, joining us on the phone from New Jersey, sort of pulling together the stuff that we need in many ways, Carol, to understand all of this. And, I go back to what he said at the top. The Fed's on it. And that's clearly the message. And that is probably underlying this J. Powell World Tour, as you pointed out.
Yeah, exactly. T-shirts on sale. Just go to the website. All right, let's get a check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's turn things over to Bob Moon. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Carol. Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House will review legislation that would impose restrictions on U.S. stock listings by Chinese companies. On Bloomberg Balance of Power, Pelosi was asked about legislation passed by the Senate that could lead to some Chinese companies being barred from U.S. stock exchanges.
We'll review it in the House. I've asked my committees to take a look at what that is. I take second place to no one in the Congress, House, or Senate in my criticisms of China's trade policies. But the fact is that we have to judge we have to have a relationship with China, and we judge every action as to what it means to us as well as what it means to them.
The legislation would require companies to certify they're not under the control of a foreign government in order to get access to U.S. capital markets. The nation's largest transit union says the new CDC guidance on keeping bus drivers and rail operators safe is shamefully inadequate. Bloomberg's Martin DeCaro reports.
The guidelines say transit agencies should make soap and water or hand sanitizer available to all workers and passengers, but they don't recommend anything about wearing masks or providing PPE to frontline employees. Amalgamated Transit Union President John Costa says most systems are failing to implement preventive measures and the federal guidelines don't help.
If we're not comfortable and it's obvious our members are dying, so we're being overexposed, how are you going to get the writing public to feel comfortable? Come on, it's not going to work.
He says pandemic-related service cuts have made it hard to maintain social distancing on buses and trains. The CDC guidelines recommend closing every other row of seats. In Washington, Martin DeCaro, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Carol, Jason, back to you.
All right, Bob Moon, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, Jason Kelly on this Thursday. Quick check on the markets for you folks, because we've been bouncing around, but we are down pretty much across the board here. Definitely off our highs of the session, also off our lows. So what does that mean? The S&P 500 just a hair lower, down 20 points, down 0.7 of a percentage point at 2051. Dow Jones Industrial Average down almost 100 points, a decline of 0.4% at 24,479. And the NASDAQ, your underperformer on a percentage basis, down nearly 0.8%. So, Jason, that works out to about a 73-point drop, and we're now trading at 93.03. But I do think still, and I got to just check, I think we're still up for the week because we did see quite a rally in stocks definitely earlier in the week. Yep, the S&P still up about 3% for the week overall. And, again, I'm going to thank the Powell World Tour.
There you go. The funny thing is, on those T-shirts, it always has like the different cities. On the back, it would just say Zoom.
Zoom. Oh, well done, Jason Kelly.
Thank you. I was working on that. Just for a few minutes. Yeah. So it is interesting to look at also what's moving, and obviously we'll tell you more about this as the show goes on and we close the market. But retail is your two biggest retail names are your two biggest gainers, L Brands and Gap. Norwegian Cruise Lines, it's there as your number 3 gainer right now in the S&P. So interesting to see. I mean, those names have just been brutalized in many ways, retail and travel, that's for sure.
If I look at the major industry groups in the S&P 500, only one up though today is industrials, and just by a hair. Everything else is down. So there's definitely a negative tone in the trade today. Talk about tones. I feel like the cover story, Jason Kelly, kind of looks at some of that and the implications of what it might mean for us post-COVID-19 and the recovery.
Absolutely. So let's get into it, if we can, with the man who put it together and then the man who puts the whole magazine together every week. We're talking about the writer Peter Coy, economics editor for Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the phone from New Jersey, and Joel Weber. He is, of course, the editor of Bloomberg Business Week, joining us from Brooklyn. All right, so Joel, set the stage for us, because
we want to know the conversation you guys had.
Yeah, because leading into this, and you're very kind in helping us sort of put together how we end up framing the cover story. You can listen to it every weekend. It's a great way to absorb it and to, as a companion or instead of reading it. And when you sent us the notes, both Carol and I were like, whoa, okay.
Kind of burned my fingers a little bit.
That's a take. So tee this up for us.
So Peter and I have been sort of having ongoing conversations about obviously the biggest story in the world right now, which is not only the virus, which I think he's done an amazing job covering, but the economy, which is the other thing that he covers really well. And I basically sort of asked him to say, like, okay, what's our take? What's this going to mean going forward? And the outlook is the thing that, as business leaders, I think everyone's wrestling with. Like, what's this thing going to look like going forward? And so when we started talking about that, I said, I think one of the things that we have to bring in here is a conversation about President Trump and sort of this mismanagement of the virus from the outset, and also now almost the mismanagement of perhaps reopening too soon. And if that goes, not well, that's going to have a serious impact on the economy. It's also a gamble for his reelection campaign. And when we started talking about that, Peter goes, well, there's this thing called gambling on a resurrection you should know about. And I'll use that as a way to transition to Peter. Peter, what's gambling on a resurrection?
Right, term from game theory. So the idea would be, if you're behind in a game, it could be any game, it could be a football game or running for election or a laboratory experiment, then you, if you just play by conservative normal rules, you'll probably lose. Whereas if you gamble, take a big chance, there's some chance that it will pay off and you'll be very happy. And if it doesn't pay off, well, you're going to lose anyway, so no big deal. And so you'll see that a lot of executives who are losing money and are trying to keep their jobs will gamble for resurrection. And this is up to the shareholders to discipline them and make sure they don't, gamble too much in a way that ends up harming the company. So I said, well, we can carry that analysis over to the United States, the federal government. Trump is taking a fairly big risk that this reopening will work, that there will be relatively few extra deaths and that the economy will rebound, and then he can win re-election. That's good for him, but it's also good for the country if it actually works out that way. But let me just finish with the downside quickly. The downside scenario is that he loses, which he probably might have done anyway, but the country loses more than it would have under a conservative approach, because there are more deaths and the economy does not reopen quickly because you're getting resurgences and re-shutdowns and people are afraid and they're staying home.
Exactly. Like, it gets to this whole idea, by postponing, do you improve or reduce the impact by delaying the open? I feel like it's the big question that everybody's debating. The problem is, this isn't a game. This is, you're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods. So I do wonder, kind of how you see it. What's the alternative way of kind of approaching this versus maybe what we're getting from President Trump?
Well, what we're hearing from a lot of epidemiologists is that you need to move gradually, open the things that are most critical and where the risk of new outbreaks is the smallest, and then keep shut the things where the upside of reopening is relatively small and the risk is great. So, for example, we've heard Trump recently saying he can't wait to see sports stadiums filling up again, and I'm thinking, really? That's exactly the last thing you should want to open, just because there's so much exposure. Once one person, asymptomatic person carrying the virus, could expose dozens or hundreds of people in a single afternoon watching a football game or something.
And so, Joel, I mean, that's such an interesting point, too. And as someone who looks across all of this, and also I think has done a really tremendous job over the course of this administration, sort of trying to understand not just economically, but from a business perspective and from a political perspective, the Trump presidency. I mean, I have to say, this feels on brand to some extent. I mean, this is in some ways a measure of this presidency.
Well, that is certainly one of the ways that we wanted to touch on it in this article. And to be clear, like I really try not to put Trump on the cover to some extent, in general. Like, this is, I think, only like maybe the third or fourth time I've done it in 2.5 years as editor. Yeah. And I also feel like it is the exact moment that we have to talk about this because it is a huge political gamble that he's also taking here. Like, and if this goes well, to Peter's point, small chance that it does, but if this goes well, like he might have the economy roaring by the time, the people are casting ballots. And that is obviously the thing that he's hoping for. And I think the realist part here, as Peter did a really great job pointing out, is like it's probably not going to go well. It's probably going to get worse if we reopen too soon. Everywhere we look around the world, the people who have gotten this thing under control, whether it's New Zealand, Iceland, South Korea to some extent, all of those places have basically extinguished and eradicated any new cases before they reopen. We're not seeing those numbers in the U.S., especially outside of the places that it's coming down, like New York. If anything, we're starting to see those numbers tick up. And if that continues unabated, we could be in a world of hurt if we have to shut things down all over again. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I just want to add on, Jason and I had a conversation with Bill Hazeltine, who created Human Genome Sciences, and he said, we all have to remember that it took one person in China to create essentially where we are today. And so we need to think about, I think there's something in your story, Peter, where you say to defeat the virus, we have to think like the virus. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really smart.
Yeah, it's like, we have a quote from a South Korean government minister who said that one infected person entering a previously unexposed population is like dropping a blob of ink into a pool of clear water. Mm-hmm. It just spreads everywhere really, really quickly.
And so, Peter, as you did this research, how are economists thinking about this? How are the experts that you're talking to thinking about this? I mean, are folks coming down on sort of in one camp or another in terms of what the right pace is? And obviously, this isn't a binary question, but I do wonder, because you do so much reading and reporting, I know, every day, like, what's the sentiment out there at this point?
Some of the Bloomberg subscribers who responded to my email thought that, we were being overly cautious. So that's one read on the situation. But I would say that most of the things I've been reading, following, there's mixed views, of course, on this. But it's more like there's no single answer like yes, reopen, or no, don't reopen. It's as I said, case by case.
Yeah.
And looking at costs and benefits in each particular situation, and also looking at local conditions. There are big differences between states that have the virus well under control and ones that don't, and they can't treat the same. It's like one of the points I made in here is that a shutdown, a stay-at-home order, is punishing but has the virtue of clarity, whereas a reopening that's happening at different paces and different ways all over the country, from county to county, state to state, is just going to be agonizing for everybody involved.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, too, that you remind us, too, that what's further complicating all of this is that, we are not all speaking with one voice, certainly not here in America. And that division is not a good thing, because if one theme I feel like we have heard from everybody we've talked to, medical community, even the corporate community, is that we need to have coordination in order to really fight this. It's a must read. It's a fantastic cover story, and we highly recommend that check that out, as well as check out our podcast feed for the cover story. It can be read to you. Economics editor Peter Coy, thank you so much. And of course, our thanks always to Bloomberg Business Week editor Joel Weber joining us on the phone. What?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that story, I've been thinking a lot about it.
I love it.
Especially since we recorded the intro to that pod. Part of it is, it will make you think. Like, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it, and certainly there is, to Peter's point, people are agreeing or disagreeing a lot about this, but it definitely it's a good thought starter and a good conversation starter with your family.
Exactly. All right. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business is coming up next. Coming up next, Jason and I are going to talk about one of the big stories impacting the markets, and that is those increased tensions between the United States and China on trade and other issues. That when we come back. This is Bloomberg.
This pandemic is about more.
This is a message from the government. There is new guidance to help businesses and employees who cannot work from home be COVID-19 secure at work. The advice will help you conduct a risk assessment, put social distancing measures in place, improve hygiene and cleaning in the workplace, and look after the well-being of your employees. Every workplace is different. Use the guidance to make your business COVID-19 secure. Access the support you need at gov.uk/working safely. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Pulls over a man into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, drives to the 5, touchdown!
Search classic game replays to listen for free.
4 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Thursday. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all very much in retreat right now. S&P 500 index is declining by 22 points, down 0.7%. The Dow is down 113. That is a drop of 0.5. NASDAQ lower by 75, a drop right now of 0.8%. Should point out, though, NASDAQ holding on to a year-to-date gain of 3.7%. 10-year up 230 seconds with a yield of 0.67%. Gold is down 1.3%, $17.24 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude higher by 0.9% right now, $33.80 a barrel. Bottom line, stocks falling as rising trade tension between the U.S. and China adds to concern about the pace of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. Speaking of which, you heard the remarks live right here on Bloomberg Radio. An unprecedented economic downturn is falling on the most vulnerable Americans, as according to Fed Chair Jay Powell, speaking at a live-streamed community listening event. Fed listens live. Let's listen to what Powell had to say.
We are in the midst of an economic downturn without modern precedent. It was sudden, and it is severe. It has already erased the job gains of the past decade and has inflicted acute pain across the country. And while the burden is widespread, it's not evenly spread. Those taking the brunt of this fallout are those least able to bear it.
Crude oil, again, moving higher now, up by just about 1%, on track for its longest run of daily gains since February 2019, after a drop in U.S. crude stockpiles added to signs that the market is starting to balance. Crude, by the way, up for a 6th straight day. Among some of the energy names that we follow for you here at Bloomberg, ExxonMobil shares, they are trading lower right now. We have got EOG Resources down 1.1%, and shares of Pioneer Natural Resources, they're up up by 0.5%. So again, recapping here, equities lower across the board with the S&P down 19, a drop there of 0.6%. The Dow down 95, down 0.4. NASDAQ lower by 65, a drop of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we want to do a little bit of Business Week economics, and we knew we had to talk about China and U.S. tensions. Trade, it's such a part of our economy, our global economy, what impact it might have and what to make of these tensions. Back with us is Andy Brown. He's Bloomberg New Economy Editorial Director. He's on the phone from New Hampshire. Andy, you've seen the stories on the Bloomberg. You know, President Trump now pointing his finger at President Xi of China and basically saying he's responsible for, quote, disinformation and propaganda attack on the U.S. and Europe. I mean, what do we make of this back and forth and what seems to be increased tension, particularly coming from President Trump at this moment? Is it just it's a campaign year and it's all about that? Or how do you read it? And how does President Xi take it?
Well, look, it's clearly escalatory rhetoric from Donald Trump. I mean, it's very typical of his approach to take a line and then when he gets resistance, double down on it. So last week he was saying that, you know, I don't want to speak to Xi Jinping anymore, and that was quite a shift, you know, because you know there's always been this fig leaf, as we were talking about last week on your show, where you know whatever else has happened in the U.S.-China relationship, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump have a great relationship, and they still get on the phone and they can still talk through problems and disputes, and sort of it added a certain ballast to the relationship. And now he's pointing, not explicitly today. I mean, he didn't actually say Xi Jinping, but it was pretty clear. He said that this disinformation and propaganda comes right from the top, and of course, the top in China is self-explanatory. It has to be Xi Jinping. But the thing is that this isn't just rhetoric. I mean, so you've got this angry, personalized rhetoric now, and it's being backed up by a series of actions coming from the U.S. administration. You know, which is adding to real tension in the relationship. So, you know, the latest was the Senate, you know, passing this bill, which may well become law, which would result in Chinese companies being kicked off U.S. stock exchanges. Companies like Alibaba, huge companies, Baidu, JD.com. You know, you've had the Commerce Department essentially putting in place a global licensing regime that will essentially deny Huawei access to semiconductors, or at least semiconductors that are manufactured with U.S. software and hardware, which is pretty much all the semiconductors in the world. You know, so it's being backed, this inflammatory rhetoric is being backed by real action coming out of the U.S. side. And of course, this is on top of all the other things that we've seen. I mean, investment restrictions, technology restrictions, visa restrictions, and so on.
Well, and it's interesting, too, a headline just crossing U.S. senators to offer a bill sanctioning China over Hong Kong. That's according to Dow Jones, a place you used to work, actually, Andy Brown, back before you came into our lovely family and empire. I mean, it's interesting to see the political might on this side of the equation, the U.S. side, and meanwhile in China, and this is a story you know very well because you have tracked the career of President Xi Jinping very closely. He appears to be, by all accounts, kind of not wasting this crisis, in the immortal words of Rahm Emanuel. He's doubling down in his own way from a consolidation of power.
That's exactly right, and I think that's Jason, the point you made, you know, about the, you know, so you've got this souring of the relationship. I mean, Henry Kissinger was telling us last year that he thinks that the U.S. and China are in the foothills of the Cold War. Right. Okay, so now we're moving out of the foothills and we're moving into the uplands and into the mountains now. So you have all of these tensions. Then the question is, what could be the flashpoint? And we've seen just in the last few days potential flashpoints. Taiwan is a real potential flashpoint now. The Chinese are infuriated at Pompeo's, congratulatory messages to Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen on her inauguration. Now you have the Hong Kong story bubbling. So, you've got the meeting of China, the National People's Congress, China's parliament today, which is likely, according to press reports, South China Post, saying that delegates to the Chinese parliament may well pass a national security law to be imposed on Hong Kong, which could very well lead to a resurgence, a renewal of street protests, a crackdown, and calls for Hong Kong to lose its special trading status with the United States. So, and again, this is just two flashpoints. You've got the South China Sea, you have the East China Sea, you have many other places where the U.S. and China potentially could come into really serious conflict.
Right, multiple flashpoints. But to speak to, Andy, what Jason said, President Xi, meantime, there's another story on the Bloomberg about how China's got a new $1.4 trillion plan to overtake U.S. in technology. Meanwhile, they make these long-term grand plans, to move their economy into the future. And, they're moving ahead. And I do wonder what we're missing, as we focus on this spat, once again, coming out of the White House.
Yeah, look, Carol, exactly. So, what the United States is decoupling to China is self-reliance, right? So the message they're taking away is we cannot trust the United States. We have to develop our own technology. So this is doubling